And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. It's fantastic to be here with everyone. There's a huge, amazing crowd with us tonight already as we go into X Series episode 85. As usual, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And quite a week, Olivia. Lots of ups and downs. You know, you think things are getting a little better and the Empire Strikes Back. And they definitely went for some pretty deep, just as the sea change was coming in around the Corona shutdown nonsense. Suddenly, we started to see Trump offering to open the country up was essential, and I'm going to get into why tonight. He's looking at May 1st. That's the date we should reopen. It should be actually even sooner, but in terms of what's on the drawing board, that's good. There's a big pushback against that date, and we're going to see why. Tonight's episode is about the deep state coup and the Constitution in crisis. And I think it's important that we all remind ourselves what we're all doing here in a free country in America and around the world, and that these are all experiments in freedom to move freedom forward, and that locking us down does exactly the opposite, and it gives government the ability, after all those gains, to put everyone back in chains and move them around as they see fit and inject them with what they see fit. And these are the things that we need to see in clear contrast to the spirit of the Constitution, which really inspired so many of the kind of freedom movements around the globe that we've seen in over 200 years. So we have to go back and ignite that understanding and apply it against the current situation, as we'll find out many important leaders have done. Now, tonight's going to be, I've grabbed a number of things that have shown up on the radar that I think are crucial, because this is a major pivot week around the whole lockdown and the whole kind of COG deep state takeover aspect. And we're going to find that these things make a lot more sense. In the past few episodes, we've been covering COG pretty heavily. And if you've seen Terrence O'Shaughnessy, who is the commander of Northcom, who would be the COG president, if we gave him that ability, that is a continuity of government emergency powers exercise, and it's something to be avoided at all costs. And they've floated it in the media in a very unusual fashion, which caught my eye since I've been studying COG for years through the work of Professor Peter Dale Scott, who's been on this program many, many times. And so tonight what we're going to do is we're going to lay the Constitution against what's happening, and we're also going to go deep on the deep state and how the deep state coup is being turned around here to really move forward at high speed by one group, and another group that is not moving at as high a speed, and they're coming into a clash with each other. And here we are in the middle trying to throw out the whole damn bunch. And that's what I think is essential for us to do. We have people on the front lines of this battle, like Bill Gates, who's a completely unelected, not a doctor, and he's laying out his sort of profile for the world to say, hey, let's get everyone vaccinated up with all my fancy vaccines. And we've also seen other people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who basically admitted to exaggerating the threat from the COVID virus in terms of deaths and the scale of it. We're going to see some amazing, and I mean amazing, examples of those numbers collapsing, and even aspects in the media having to admit that, which is crucial because we put it forward. There have been a number of voices silenced this week, and I think it's dangerous, even if you don't agree with the voices, or if you find their views extreme. We have to protect the rights of people everywhere to speak about these things. And so David Icke's situation was very classic when he came on and was speaking about the aspects of the coronavirus that don't add up, and the 5G aspects, which are crucial, and which Professor Farrell, Dr. Farrell, brought up the last time he was here. This is the nature of the thing. In an open democracy, in the freedom of the world, you get to talk about things. And that's the first rule. When you can't talk about things, that's totalitarianism. That's totally different. That's a fascist state, when you can't say things. That's what they want to move it toward, under the guise of, oh, it doesn't rise to our terms and conditions on Twitter or something. So those people have thrown in with a kind of system that is totalitarian. Pick your choice. Some people think it's a totalitarian Chinese social credit type system, and there's a lot of signs of that in Google, in Facebook, and on Twitter. And then other people think it's a Nazi-inspired system that resides in the deep state. Either way, we're getting it from both sides. So I think it's crucial for us to remember that free speech is the core, and I mean the absolute core, of the Constitution and the freedoms that we live under. When you remove free speech, that's it. You're done. It's over. So when they do that, that's when you know you're very teetering on the edge. So this is the main thing, I think, to stop. And of course, being in the media, it's crucial in this independent world to get that right, because we really need to bring the facts to that and to that public, so that when they say, oh, these terrible conspiracy theorists, you know, they want you to believe that the virus doesn't exist or something. First of all, anybody can say whatever they want to say. That's number one. Second, on this program, and I don't think anywhere else have I heard anyone say it doesn't exist. The idea is, how exaggerated is it, and is the government using it to create a fascist state? That is fundamentally the question that we're going to address here tonight. That's where we're going with it. And, you know, there have been situations like New York and major centers of this, where they've been able to pump this up because, you know, this is a very catchy situation on the health front. And like the flu, it causes a lot of deaths. But, you know, the flu actually causes more. So there's a lot of back and forth medically. What I want to take out of that is that they're moving too far with fraudulent numbers into a situation where they want to have everybody locked down, everybody using certificates to move from state to state, you know, and these types of things. So these are the things which are we're not giving them the consent for. And this is what they're trying to build up through the media. And there's a whole kind of shriekometer going off in the media about this. What I think is important is fundamentally on speech and the media. Remember, it's right there in the Constitution to start with. So what I'm going to do with the show is I'm going to have now, I'm going to play something very important, which is, this is President John F. Kennedy reading the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, just to get us into the proper frame of mind for this. We're going to take this on, and then we're going to move in to this kind of constitutional deep state roulette that they've set up for us tonight. So let me get this rolling, and here we go.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new gods for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations.
That is the fascinating preamble And it's very interesting, too, because when we look at it in the Declaration of Independence, we are really reacting to a system of oppression. And what happened there was the king started to turn on those colonies because he thought that they were too free. They had their own systems, and he tried things to abolish their legislature, and he even hired foreign agents to sabotage them because he didn't want them to be free. Now, we're facing a very similar situation. I think ever since the American Revolution happened, these powers have been in a bind. And here we are some 220 some odd years later, and the situation is looking like, well, you got a problem because the system has been the model for the rest of the world for freedom. So therefore, when we look at the forces that they were battling that brought the Constitution into being, because remember, the revolution is in 1776, but the actual Constitution comes into being later. It's actually not executed. I have the exact date here, but it comes into being in 1791 is when it becomes effective. And we also have the first president inaugurated, George Washington. So the system as a whole develops, and this is what's crucial to understand, which is they were under tremendous odds in facing down the situation. They had come out of this very powerful island kingdom of the UK, and the UK pretty much ruled the roost. And so these small colonies to take on that system required incredible bravery. Now, I think the lesson that we can take from it is that they couldn't suffer themselves to live under that kind of tyranny. So we can't now sort of embrace the tyranny after having made all these gains, because a few have sort of amassed, using the same freedoms, an incredible, sizable canon of wealth and power and technology, which has superseded the knowledge and the wealth of the citizenry. That great imbalance is something that we can use this crisis to regain some sense of balance. Now, I want to read a couple of quotes here also from JFK and Thomas Jefferson that'll kind of set the tone for talking about these things so we understand where we're coming from in the first place as a nation. By the way, everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 85. We're going deep in this constitutional crisis that we've hit, and this is definitely a deep state coup takeover attempt, and they have been using the emergency and the emergency powers to install a different form of government, and ultimately leading to a kind of transhuman or subhuman reality. So that's something that we have to voice now and push back on now while we're dealing with this crisis. And we're supporting and helping along all the middle managers and the healthcare workers who are dealing with that. But fundamentally, it's become clear that the governments are overreaching, and it is a small group that is controlling this action. And a lot of that group has been operating a kind of medical tyranny, and the only way to throw it off is to kind of reflect back on how we've thrown off these tyrannies in the first place. Okay. I also want to remind everyone you're going to be taking questions here in the second half of the program, so write them all in caps, and Miss Olivia will be putting them together. How are we doing out there?
I'll do my best. It is a busy ideas room tonight.
This is a busy show. In the ideas room, I see a lot of good questions. And, for me, it's so vital, the kind of feedback that we do this back and forth, because, I set up my presentation, I'm delivering these things for you, but your input is so crucial, and that's why we love getting to the second half of the program as well. And one thing I want to point out is, with all of the people being thrown off social media, and I'm going to read later this incredible thing about this change.org petition that we had up there with a number of people about ID 2020 and Bill Gates, and really exposing that and bringing it to the attention of so many different people and government leaders, that change.org removed it, saying it doesn't live up to their standards. Well, this is a problem, because if their standards are that kind of fascism, then change.org and Twitter and Facebook, they're all just showing their hand. And at a certain point, they're saying, we kind of don't care if you have a sense of free speech. We'll delete whatever the heck we like. There's nothing offensive about looking into ID 2020 and Bill Gates. And Bill Gates has a lot of money and a lot of influence. But you know what? He's a little man because he has no medical authority, zilch. He didn't even graduate college. And he's known as a very slippery, software con artist. He's gone into these different countries. Some countries want to hold him for tribunal for the different things that he's experimented on their populations with vaccines. So bring it on, Bill. If that's what you want, then you might find yourself the outlaw international criminal, and you could be like Henry Kissinger. You land in a place and all these authorities go to arrest you before you make your speech, and you take off on some private jet. If that's the life that you want, that would be my guess. But in America, we're rejecting you completely and utterly. And your vaccine solutions of an electronic tattoo underneath the skin and giving that to children, I wouldn't try that in America and in other countries as soon as they catch on. So here are the JFK quotes I've picked up, which are in the spirit of JFK reflecting on our situation with liberty and the Constitution. And I think these really apply. This is the interesting thing, how timely they are in relation to the current debacle. Okay, quote, "In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it." Now, this is inscribed on the wall at the gravesite of John F. Kennedy at Arlington National Cemetery. Here's more. Quote, "The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it, and the glow from that fire can truly light the world." This is very important, America being the model. Not America, the puppet of the New World Order. Not America, the puppet of pharmaceutical interests that have gone so fat and so bloated that they think that they can now just harvest the population by giving them all of these toxins and these vaccines and then having them be docile zombies to be gotten rid of and replaced with robots. I mean, let's face it, this is what they're heading towards, this kind of dystopian future. So smarter minds, more ethical minds, cooler minds need to prevail and put things back on course. Here's another Kennedy quote, which I love. "In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from that responsibility. I welcome it." Okay, that's the one I started with. "The energy, the faith, the devotion that we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it." Now, Kennedy had been, since his very young days, aware of another system of government that was operating parallel with the regular government. And he saw his own father's connections with some of that, and he started to become aware of it. But he had far more of an idealistic nature than his father did. And what he wanted to do was bring the idea of wisdom and freedom to all these different countries and show them that it was a better way than, say, the kind of Russians, the totalitarian sweep of the communists that was going on. Now, we may be looking at a kind of a redo of this entire situation because there's a gigantic communist influence involved in communist China right now. And they've been kind of, playing themselves off as big heroes with their capitalism turning things around, because American companies like Google, like Facebook have gone over there, and other companies have shipped their, all their, what's amazing is they've shipped all of their labor over there, which is really phenomenal, and their factories. So when you go over there, it's basically like how America used to be. But the main reason that they did that is that through a series of shifty moves like NAFTA and GATT, particularly GATT, and getting China into the World Monetary System, the IMF and things like that, they were able to have these people work without any standards. That is, there were no labor standards like there were in the United States. And I've talked many times about how those factories where they were assembling technological parts, they'd have the people work so much that they jump out the window. And so their solution wasn't to give them better health care or to cut down their hours. Their solution was to put a net around the place, so when they jumped out the window, they didn't kill themselves. That's on record. So, but it's a good example, and I use it to kind of demonstrate that China does not deserve the leadership of the world, and that it is the ideals of the United States that can truly be a beacon for other nations. But in its current form, if that influence of corruption and the deep state intersects with this other communist influence, then we're in a huge world of trouble. So we're going to need to reset our course. I think what's going on with the current administration is a huge game of ping pong, but they still haven't entirely figured out how to capture this administration. And this administration, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And however you feel about Trump or anything like that, at this point, it doesn't matter, because you have Trump or Pelosi or Biden or whatever it is. I can't even imagine people saying Biden. Can't believe myself. And I was thinking the other day, I've been saying they can't run this guy. And then after a while, I was like, no, this could be interesting to just see somebody lose it in public.
In real time?
It could make 2020 particularly unique. So I'm going to go through some of that back and forth. And the way that I set this up was basically the sea change, which was when Attorney General Barr disagreed with Bill Gates that we should have these lockdowns and certificates and things, and said it was un-American. And then a little while later, and Trump talking about opening the nation up. And he is talking about, as I said, his crucial date, May 1st, for reopening the economy. Now, one thing I want to enact on the program tonight is this hashtag, which is New Day 2020, about May 1st, 2020. That's the hashtag we need to get trending. And what it means is we're going to reopen America on 5/1/2020. We can't hold back. We can't have them say, oh, we tried to do it, but we couldn't. The country needs to reopen, because pretty soon you're going to have worse problems than just flu-like symptoms floating around, people running around with masks on in supermarkets. You're going to have major financial collapse, and you're going to have major inner city issues. So New Day 2020 is when they reopen the country on May 1st. We use it as an opportunity to say, you know what, the deep state has used this crisis to try to remove our civil liberties, to try to roll over our constitutional rights, but we're taking it as a wake-up call, and now the big pushback is on against them and their vaccines and their distortion, their entrainment technology, the whole bit. New Day 2020, that's the hashtag, 5/1/20. When they reopen the country, boom, we're ready to roll. And between now and then, the next 3 weeks, we set ourselves up for it. Good, fine. You want middle managers who are going to say, you know what, you need to basically only go to the store if you need coffee, if you're me. Fine, we'll play ball. We'll play ball for 3 weeks, and that's it. That's it. Once we get to May 1st, the country's open. You promised it. Now, the Trump administration has been trying to do this, but some strange things have been popping up while they've been coming up to say this. Trump, inasmuch, said at his press conference today, which I watched, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for it, and it's the toughest decision I'll ever have to make, but I'm going for it. Now, what we have as the blowback is quite fascinating. This article came out in the New York Times today, landed right in my inbox, and I was like, oh, isn't this something? Because it made it seem like the government had gone back to all those incorrect projections about hundreds and thousands of deaths. And I said, where did this come from? But if you dig deeper, all it is unnamed sources in Homeland Security projecting this for the New York Times, which means it ain't worth zilch. And they had tried this already a couple of months ago with the Imperial College report. That's how we got this junk situation in the first place. But here was the article in any case. That was the one. And it says, coronavirus live updates. Trump calls relaxing restrictions a major decision as projections warn of a possible infection spike. This is the part. Projections warn of a possible infection spike. Where? All the projections have been going down. What are you talking about? Where did this come from? And if you go in there and read down through the article, which I highly recommend, which is on the front page of the New York Times, you will find that it's an unnamed source inside Homeland Security. So basically, you find someone who has a kind of a Nazi tendency in Homeland Security, who doesn't like the idea that they're relaxing all these lockdown restrictions on Americans, and the fact that Americans can't go to work doesn't bother them. And what happens is we get a situation where this person who is in league with this whole kind of Bill Gates shutdown order, Anthony Fauci shutdown order, now those people suddenly are the unnamed sources that are projecting. You know, he's talking about 250,000 deaths and all this stuff. No, 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 no. The numbers have gone down below 60,000 in their projections. And as we know, their projections are already bloated way over the top for this. We explained it in the last episode, but more information came out this week. Everybody across the board was looking at this and saying, I can't believe it, because the numbers are literally collapsing. Let's look at some of those incredibly shrinking numbers. As I do that, Miss Olivia, how are you doing out there?
Good. Do you want a question?
I will take it.
Tricky Vicky wants to know, is it time to move to return to civil law as sovereign citizens of the dirt of the states that are united? How do we beat back these technocrats?
There's always been different talk about that. Should the states be sovereign, etc.? I don't think that's something that should be addressed right now. What is important is to throw off the ridiculous lockdowns, because we are the United States and we don't, under the Constitution, you know, one of the reasons they haven't done that federal lockdown order is because there's no legal precedent for it. There's no background for it. All you can do is say emergency powers. And even governors and people like that, a lot of them, if you'll notice in the back door, are actually saying it's a suggestion and not making it a rule. There's a reason for that, because they don't want to get sued when all this is over, and they've overhyped it and over-dramatized it. That's nothing to say about, you know, it's not to say that the situation hasn't brought some health crises to different communities, and that's always difficult. But in different health crises, you know, like even things that were far more serious, like the AIDS epidemic, they didn't shut down, you know, airlines and things like that. So you didn't lock down entire cities. I think that we can say that the deep state has overreached here, and they got people on board with them to do this because they were scaring them with things like the Imperial College report, which eventually went from a projection of 500,000 deaths. You might remember 2 weeks later, they said, well, maybe 20,000 or under. Well, that's a pretty big jump. So they scared the hell out of everybody with the big numbers, and here are the small numbers when it comes time when people are actually going to get the real deal. But here's something else even more explosive that we've been seeing. Dr. Birx, who is on the Corona Task Force for President Trump, and this is all CDC stuff now, she says, unlike some countries, if someone dies with COVID-19, we're counting that as a COVID-19 death. In other words, if you die from something else, if you have a heart attack, but you're suspected of having this COVID, they're going to mark it COVID, which instantly gives a gigantic pool of death numbers that didn't exist. In fact, it makes the numbers fraudulent. So, and that's not just like an internet rumor. She gave it as part of the speech during the press conference live, and she repeated it in several interviews. That's real clear politics we're looking at here. It's, you know, as mainstream as you get. Even they admit it. So then we had the Minnesota senator and doctor come on and talk to so many people and say, well, the CDC sent me this thing basically coaching me how to do death certificates in the state. And they said if someone is suspected of it, even if you haven't tested them, mark it COVID. That's not the way to get accurate numbers. That is a way to create panic and the idea of a pandemic to seize emergency powers with. There's no getting around it. So they want to inflate the numbers. It's not to say that there aren't numbers there and that the people who deal with the COVID virus don't have a very serious issue. But, you know, we have seen this incredible overhyping of it. I mean, there are many serious issues. As I've pointed out last year, 72,000 people in America died of a drug overdose. You know, this thing, forget it. They're just around 10,000 deaths, and they're using this faulty projection mechanism of just saying, hey, let's make everybody who dies of anything a COVID death. So definitely the numbers have been fraudulently induced. That's a problem. It's a really big problem. So that destroys that trust between the people who are getting the numbers and seeing it on the ground through the press and the people who are giving them those numbers. In fact, they are lying about the numbers. Now, when people have gone outside of the box on this and called it out or whatever, now they're getting thrown left and right or demonetized left and right because you can't say anything but what the kind of establishment wants you to say in this case. So this kind of medical hierarchy is coming into being, and they have these COG emergency powers, which means somebody like President Trump saying, well, I'm going to open the country back up in May face a direct COG threat from these people, from this group. And Terrence O'Shaughnessy is their president. He's the emergency guy. They want to roll him in until they can have a safe election with zombie Biden and whoever else. So it's a very kind of sick situation. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And it's so obvious. Usually they do a lot of this stuff behind the scenes. And even during 9/11, I didn't see this type of egregious in-your-face fascism touted. Let's start with some of this. And this is about controlling the image. Remember, I mentioned the Bill Gates Stop ID 2020 petition. There it is. So it's been removed by change.org. Change.org is one of those things that has come into being to be like fight the power. And, you know, you can get these petitions together and you can make real change. It's called change.org. How can you get change if they throw you off because you're challenging a billionaire who's a pal of theirs? That doesn't make any sense. So, see, the mask is dropping. Money is driving, influence is driving these people.
Who's behind it? Change.org.
Well, this is a series, yeah.
Is it mainly a Democratic liberal
It is.
elite? Okay.
It is indeed, yeah. But I would say that I've seen things on there that weren't liberal or particularly Democratic that did just fine as petitions and that they didn't yank. This is a real shocker. It really is, because
money talks.
Well, what they're saying is we don't care if the majority, just like with the Trump administration and their victory in 2016, basically the media, along with the CIA, said, we don't care. We're going to get you out anyway, you know, and that's what they tried. Russian collusion and all this kind of nonsense. Again, it doesn't matter how you feel about Trump. Do you want the CIA with their blood-stained hands to just, you know, tell us who we can have in the White House? No, we choose that stuff. The CIA is an extra constitutional agency. They're not even envisioned in the Constitution or government or anywhere. We didn't even have them until after World War II. And the idea was they're going to do sweeps of international bodies like spies that we learned about during the war. And they're going to feed that information back in a loop to President Truman. That's why they were created. They weren't created to make their own policy, have their own air force and drone everybody and get us into all these Middle Eastern wars and assassinate our presidents. So, you know, this is the fundamental nature of the problem when we look at these issues. We're in fundamental systems that don't work. And the CIA, if we look back to the Kennedy administration, well, that's 57 years ago that they assassinated him, okay, come November. So we've had this problem. It's a big problem. And, you know, they have found themselves moving into areas of controlling what we see. I've been looking deeply for their role in the COVID rollout, and I'm going to get to that tonight as well. But I think when we look at this, you know, we have to be honest about it, which is fundamentally the rights of the citizens for media is entrenched. It's the very heart of the Constitution. So, you know, you cannot throw us off change.org because you like Bill Gates, you know. Look.
Who are paid by Bill Gates.
Yeah. I mean, well, here's the other thing. We know through the work of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I'm going to get to some great quotes in a minute here, along with fascist Gavin Newsom, the California governor. We know for a fact that there have been vaccine injuries, okay? There's a fund that has paid out billions of dollars on behalf of the United States to families who have had vaccine injury. It's a fact. It's not debatable. You're not an anti-vaxxer for saying it. That's ridiculous. Anti-vaxxer is stupid anyway, because there are a number of people who go through these systems and they say, well, I'll take the 28 or the 36 vaccinations, but if you don't go for the 78, you're an anti-vaxxer and you can't go to school and all the rest. It's idiotic. And there comes a point where the greed becomes too much of an overreach. It happened in other areas. It happened with tobacco companies. They did the same types of things. And eventually the public hazard aspect came out. These guys know how to cover their tracks. But when we look at the vaccine issue, we have to be frank. There was a point where in the 80s, they were getting sued so much, and there were companies like that were helmed by Donald Rumsfeld and people of this nature who brought things to market that weren't safe. And they were getting sued so badly that a number of those companies said, we're going to give up. We can't do it. We can't make a profit because we're getting sued left and right. So a series of moves in Congress brought a bill to the table for the Reagan administration to say, make it so that vaccine companies cannot be sued, which is absurd. But that's what we have on the books. They can't be sued. That's a problem. So when you exempt a company from being sued, they're even in a worse position than all those companies that push pharmaceuticals and things like that, because at least you can sue them. You might have to go through a phalanx of, complete legal terror to do it, but you can do it. But with vaccine companies, it doesn't work that way. Now, with that kind of protection, where's their incentive to play it straight? Now, we've seen with things like Gardasil, and there are people who have put out the movie Vaxxed and Vaxxed 2. All the information is out there. I don't have to go down those bullet points with you here. It's so well stated and it's ubiquitous. We understood with the GMOs that GMOs, for example, and Roundup through Monsanto, that these things were harmful. And we kept hearing from the media, no, they're fine. Go along with it. It's in the lab. It's tested. It's A-OK. Here's your Frankenfish. Well, as it turned out, through independent voices, they pushed that back. And you know what? Monsanto collapsed because they were dishing out so many billions of dollars in court cases for people getting cancer from Roundup, and this is the nature of the thing. So when we look at this situation, we have to see it takes time, but then it cracks. The problem is this time what they want to do is get the system so solid and get you so locked in and get you so drugged and locked down and all the rest of it that you won't be able to challenge them at all. And that's what the whole Gates WHO, world government, Bono and the Clintons playing tennis is all about. And there comes a point where we as citizens have to fundamentally say, I'm not going for it. And I'm not going to face penalties. You are. It's crucial. It's a crucial sea change.
I love that.
There's no question about it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Ben Dover wants to know, who is behind Gates? This is a big question.
Well, Gates has such a deep family history. Of course, his family being involved with those elite movers and shakers. We know that his dad was one of the first Planned Parenthood people. And they were deep in these groups. And we find those names recur over and over again. The Rockefellers recur over and over again. Whenever we go deep on this, we find the Bushes showing up again. So it's kind of that revolving door. But once he joined, he became such a, that kind of money that he gained by being positioned so well as he was. As soon as he got into that position, he goes off into high finance and he goes walking tours through Africa and India and other places looking to basically experiment on the populations there. And the idea being he's such an altruistic, great guy. Look, I think the fact is you have to be able to make a case. You have to be able to put somebody in jail over their crimes. But because of the amount of money that Gates has, if he's out there doing his own vaccine organization and you're like, well, he wants to do his own thing, fine. He's a businessman, let him do it. But when he comes into the process of living and tells you that you have to sit back and suck it up while he develops a vaccine for 18 months and good luck with your bills hanging out in your house. And by the way, you won't be going back to having, events anymore with crowds. Too bad for you. Gates is an idiot. I came up with a popular hashtag last week. It was hashtag STFU Gates, and the thing flew off the charts. The reason is people don't want to hear it from Gates. Who is Gates? He is basically, as I said, a very, very slippery operator in that system.
He actually better be careful because people are talking about throwing him into a volcano. I see this meme coming up a lot.
That would be worse than getting hit with a pie in the face. And I don't advocate for him being thrown in a volcano. I'd rather what he's doing be exposed and he be legally dealt with. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, and my goodness, we have a lot to cover tonight. It is exceptional. And let's keep rolling. Here we go. About Gates, I do want to say this. Here's what he said. Shut down everywhere for at least 10 weeks. Bill Gates warns there's no middle ground in the coronavirus fights. Shut down everywhere. And then he was like, shut down anywhere means shut down everywhere. Well, that's like segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And there were people who were starting to realize that this guy had a messiah complex, he's a megalomaniac, but it was worse. There's something even more sinister behind the whole thing, which is a fundamental eugenics agenda. Now, Gates isn't the focus of the program tonight, but I am going to say this, that combination of tremendous power and press influence with this kind of maniacal desire for eugenics, along with the idea of sort of rolling him out during a crisis, saying like, here's a vaccine for everybody, and you can go to state, show your little card ID that says, you might as well be wearing the Star of David in World War II and being put in Nazi camps. That is sick. The fact that this guy in modern times would be suggesting that is really incredible. And I think that's what needs to be exposed, is the attitude of it. That is the article in Science Alert. An invisible quantum dot tattoo could be used to ID vaccinated kids. They've really been floating this one hard. And it says, for the people overseeing nationwide vaccination initiatives in developing countries, keeping track of who had which vaccination can be a tough task. And you know what? If you wear this fancy tattoo, everything will be easier for them. Just go for it. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knows a great deal about Gates. And he has done the best work pushing back the kind of vaccine Nazis. And what we have there is somebody who is deeply dedicated to the public welfare and has the history. I mean, his dad being Robert Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1968 as he was running for the presidency, and being the nephew of John F. Kennedy, who changed the world and was trying to really kind of get rid of the deep state and the CIA influence and control. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is very aware of the damage that has been caused by the likes of Gates. He's put out a number, of important quotes about Gates. What I want to do is just read a couple of things that he had to say about 5G and coronavirus. And this was actually from March 30th. So we're going to go back here, and then I'm going to read a more recent one. Is this the future for America, with a KA? And he's showing a video. He says, this video shows why big telecom loves the coronavirus. The quarantine has facilitated the unobstructed 5G rollout, which has effectively ended the opportunity for mass public protests. True. Which were our best hope for derailing the 5G robber barons from microwaving our country and destroying nature. The telecom titans now have an open road, willing politicians, and a compliant population sufficiently frightened, beleaguered, broke, and submissive to relinquish their constitutional freedoms and welcome to the surveillance state. 5G has little to do with improving service to individuals. It has everything to do with big tech data mining, surveillance, and social control. If we don't stop them, they will engineer a massive transfer of wealth and sovereignty away from our citizens into the hands of big telecom, big tech, that's Microsoft, Facebook, and Google, big pharma, military intelligence apparatus, and the ruling plutocrats. Remember what he says here, if we don't stop them. This is a crucial point. Chief among these is Bill Gates with his sinister anti-American tracking system, ID 2020. R.F. Kennedy Jr. has really helped to focus this. His suspiciously coincidental October 2019 coronavirus war game simulations. Gates passed out adorable coronavirus-themed stuffed animals to all the high-level participants.
I didn't know that.
Whoa. I mean, think about it. That's sick. His pandemic documentary on Netflix, his autocratic control of Anthony Fauci and the WHO, for which he is the top funder. Keep that in mind, folks, when they come out with their projections. His coronavirus vaccine patents and his barely disguised, let's be honest, giddy delight at the quarantine that is impoverishing his countrymen and crushing their will to resist his tyrannical reforms. Gates wants us to cede all power to his benevolent dictatorship, including power over our bodies, our health, and our children. Gates is the nerdy kid with the magnifying glass. The rest of us are the ants getting scorched in his global science experiments.
Wow.
Those are factions out there. Gates' faction really moved with the coronavirus. That sort of global grid control of humanity, moving in the robots, moving out the humans, that thing that wants to enslave humanity, that moved through the Gates moves. On the other side is a faction like the Kennedy faction, which sees it and wants to stop it and thinks it's horrible. Now, doesn't matter Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party. The point is, what we need are people who will push back against this. And I don't care what party or who they are, and I don't care to argue about which party is better or which figure is better. They need to be behind pushing this back. Now, somebody else is quite interesting who got into the is 5G related to the coronavirus. Of course, Dr. Farrell talked about this with me last week, and he had some very interesting research that he had done around this. And there's no doubt that this has been brought through the idea of activating the virus with 5G as well, or having it expand as a result of it. Those things, and just the mere fact, 5G autonomously is very dangerous. There's just no getting around it. We've all known that cell phones and other things are dangerous, but 5G is next level dangerous. So the idea of it being associated in any way with the coronavirus and someone looking into that now is so off the radar. It's such an untouchable. If you say it, you are going to get thrown off, and they'll probably throw us off just for saying it just now. But interestingly enough, David Icke, again, take him or leave him, he gave a big interview and he came out himself and he said, here's the research that I've done. And he did a lot of research. This is a guy who can think on his feet. This isn't like a blue chicken Wilcock or some joker. Icke really has the ability to think through these things and do research. Now, what he was saying was that he was looking at a certain doctor's research, and I think that's what they actually got him for, not for this interview that he did afterwards. But in any case, when they ran his interview, they took it down, and it was getting incredible. I was watching it live. It was getting incredible traction, and he was challenging this coronavirus narrative. And this is from another end of the spectrum. So next, what happened? Then the BBC decided to do an article on him and tie him into these incidents where they've had a few incidents where people have burned up the 5G towers. Now, by the way, the easiest thing in the world for these people to do is to destroy their own equipment because they're insured and just say, oh, those terrible conspiracy theorists are doing it. And there might be people out there who want to blow these things up. But talking about it, that doesn't mean anything. You can't get rid of somebody's freedom of speech because of that. I mean, there have been tons and tons of situations in history, like the civil rights movement, where we talk about things that inflames people's passions. That's the way life goes. Not to mention when we've looked at different things about religious rights and Muslim communities or whatever it is, you run those risks all the time of offending somebody. So the idea of taking him out is a shot across the bow for anybody, because they know that as long as you are hearing options, as long as you are hearing different perspectives, you have the ability to choose what to believe. That gets you out of the narrative mind control thinking that's coming through the media. They want a one-note media telling you this is a terrible disaster, black plague, you have to surrender all your rights and all your children's rights, by the way. Because I'm going to show you where some idiot from the WHO suggested grabbing children out of people's homes. That's not a scare tactic. That's something he said. So these are fascist medical people aligned with fascist political forces and who have real dunces on the front lines. Like Gavin Newsom is one of the dumbest people I've ever seen in public life. How he ever got to be governor, except for being the nephew of Nancy Pelosi, I'll never know. But speaking of Gavin, Gavin gets a hard time on this show, but he deserves it. Before I get into Gavin, how are you doing out there?
I'm having a hard time keeping up. Tons of questions already.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here on X Series 85. I see some great faces out there. Gigi Young, thank you.
Thank you, Gigi.
And it's great to, Gigi's been doing outstanding work, and I recommend everyone view her recent videos around all these things. She's been a tremendous voice. We've seen a lot of people putting out very good material through this, which I'm glad about. And I think a lot of the kind of paperweight or paper-thin movements that were promising, mass arrests and all that stuff, they're starting to look that, when a real world crisis comes up, they can't handle it. It just looks like a weird fraud, and they start using like video game pictures and things like that. So it separates a lot of wheat from the chaff. That's another reason why it can be useful. Let's look at, yes.
Can we get something out of the way?
Oh, yeah.
It's not, it's very delicate. Okay, so we had a couple Kennedys die this week. And a lot of people are discussing it in the ideas room and whether it is related to any of this.
Well, look, I'll tell you one thing, which is we have a history with the Kennedys of them being targeted for their political activities. And, it was a terrible tragedy that took place with Maeve Kennedy and her son. The only thing I can say is that, the family asked for privacy around that. And, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. definitely is someone who understands the kind of political stakes involved. The only thing that I do want to add is I do think that we can take that, whether or not it's the case in that situation, and just generally, there's a tremendous risk when people speak up who are high profile. And so the importance of giving people our support when they are speaking up about these things and not waiting for it to blow over or hiding, or taking non-controversial positions. I mean, I think that people should speak what they think about it, and whether that's controversial or not. And if they want to go along with it, that's their business. But what I see is that it's important because very often people come forward and they say something and they really have a breakthrough. Look, I'm even looking at the Icke situation like that. The fact that they railroaded him off as a result of this, because he had an audience for what he was saying. And the truth is that whether you're reaching 10 people or 100,000 or 1 million people, the idea is the exchange of information, and that you have the ability to do that. That's something that we've earned through slavery and all the other terrible things and the tyrannies and the kings and going through all this stuff. We earned that. That's ours. It's not something you can take away and say, like, here's my proclamation. You can no longer talk about the coronavirus. Go to hell. And where you get people standing up for this, you have to get behind them. I mean, it's essential that those voices have the support. That, you know, when I think about stories like the Dark Alliance, and I go back to Gary Webb and him sort of putting it on the record with great risk to himself that there were groups that were taking the money. The CIA was running cocaine money from Central America into our streets to fund their weird, attempts to overthrow other countries, and that's how we got the strong crack epidemic in the late 80s and 90s. You have to think about that type of bravery. It's a good example. And, as it turns out, he got incredibly ostracized for putting that out there and eventually committed suicide, or in fact was taken out. So we have to realize that the stakes are incredibly high when we're dealing with this. But again, the groups that is performing these things and that is attempting through this deep state apparatus to kind of create this coup atmosphere and throw out the Constitution and throwing the Constitution into crisis, they're a small group. It's not that large a group. They have incredible tentacles. They have incredible powers. But in terms of actual numbers, they're not that big. So what we have in America is, we have some great leaders, people like Ron Paul, for example, who called for the firing of Dr. Fauci for exaggerating numbers. That's what you do. You fire someone when they exaggerate a situation, create a panic, and they're wrong. And they're a doctor. You get fired. We have some 330 million people in America, and they are bred fundamentally through the Constitution to freedom. And then our friends in Canada and our friends in the UK and our friends across Europe and in Ireland and in Australia, these are people who want this kind of freedom, and it's around the world, even those that are in under repressive situations. Countries like Russia are not going to win any medals for how they're dealing with this either, because I think that all of them are taking advantage of this rush, like the Chinese did their big fascist crackdown, and this is our version of ours. The problem is America is fundamentally a leader in freedom. That's what we hold up to the world about who we are. When we do it, it really looks bad because we're always demanding from them, hey, you have to pay attention to human rights and all the rest of it. When we become the nation that's known for repression and foreign wars, that's not America. This is not America. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, episode X-85. We're going deep now into this deep state coup and the kind of Russian roulette that we're playing with these guys. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our free newsletter. That's where we can stay in touch with you. And every Friday, you'll get those emails from us. It's not a lot of marketing in there. It's basically just letting you know what shows are coming on. We have some incredible guests coming up for you this April who are going to really try to give us that perspective thing again. And like I said, whether it comes from people thinking that, this is a bioweapon, or whether people think, it's practically nothing, or if they think that it's something that's regurgitated from 10 years ago, we need those different voices to be informed about it. This one note thing about, we're in this crisis and you have to help, and the dead bodies are piling up and all the rest of it. It's always difficult whenever we have any kind of a health crisis, for sure. But they have taken it to the moon, and they are trying to assume these emergency powers. And in America, they're trying to roll in the continuity of government, non-constitutional state, which has no basis for anything. It has no constitutional basis, no basis in law. I mean, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the fundamental, that's where we get the justice system. It's the fundamental understanding of our rights. COG was somebody's weird concept, and it got bloated out into this other system. And so I do want to point out that this Terrence O'Shaughnessy, he's going to come up tonight. And I pay attention to him not just to kind of project that he's some sinister figure, but the fact is that the media and Newsweek were promoting him as your next commander-in-chief if Trump got the coronavirus, which is absurd. because the next commander-in-chief would be Pence if Trump needed to recover, or not even. Look at Boris Johnson. He's coming through it after having it. Rand Paul got it and recovered pretty quickly. Most people do. You don't hear that too much. This thing about Terence O'Shaughnessy, I think, is important, and we need to pay attention to him. He's the commander of Northcom. Northcom was created in 2002. Northcom was not a natural part of the United States military structure. It's a strange aberration that came about as an overreaction after 9/11, of which there's so many unanswered questions, but anyways, we created the Patriot Act and all these other things around it. Now, I think what's crucial on our side to remember is that none of these things and none of these people have the ability to trump the Constitution. They just don't. And so the COG, which I've gone through, and how the system got set up and how it was Rumsfeld and Cheney who are key players in that, along with Senior Bush. When we look at that situation and we realize these people have been using this apparatus because it is so secret that you can have all these covert communications and all the rest happening, then we have to wonder really out loud, what's going on here? And why is Newsweek talking about this guy taking over? First of all, he's a Canadian. That's a little bit of a problem, since in the Constitution, you have to be a natural-born citizen to be president. But to be COG president, you pull magic out of a hat and you get whoever the Northcom commander is. We didn't vote for that. That's an absurd system. The COG thing needs to be abolished, and what it needs to do is just have its normal succession layers based on the Constitution. And what they said was it goes directly from the president, then it goes to the vice president, then it goes to the Speaker of the House. That's the way the succession works. Not weird COG, Commander, General, President, Terence J. O'Shaughnessy. And O'Shaughnessy has demonstrated a kind of martial philosophy. And what's weird is in the middle of all this, as they were losing some of the kind of oxygen around the corona thing, and they had it on so hardcore that people were just getting sick of it. Then they laid out this thing 2 days ago where Terence O'Shaughnessy said, well, we intercepted some Russian craft coming into our airspace and escorted them out, and created this kind of phony incident, and it didn't really get picked up. But he had a few interviews about it. Watch for those things, because this is the op that's piggybacking on the crisis. Remember, we've talked about this. And when we see that happen, watch out, because that's when they're going for military moves, when they go for a biohazard, when they go for a terrorism act. Oh, there was this terrible terrorism. Now we have to go to war in the middle of all this. That is even worse than the bad situation that they've parked us into. As long as we are keeping ourselves well informed about who these people are and what's happening here, people on the ground, they're taking a lot of temperatures, remember, literally and figuratively, with this situation. The temperature that they want to take in America is, will people accept, one, an electronic vaccination tattoo, which gives the government complete control over what you do, and two, will people accept draconian martial rules to live under? Because then you can get rid of the Constitution and they can rifle through all this other stuff they want to do. And you can basically become a nation of indentured servants, or as Olivia would say, slaves.
I don't like to mince words.
That's a good way to put it. But I think this is what we're looking at here. Okay, next up, our friend Gavin Newsom. Now, something strange has been going on, and it's another variation on this continuity of government situation. Oh, by the way, before I get into that, speaking of David Icke and stuff and people getting pushed around, the FDA tells Alex Jones to stop promoting unapproved, misbranded coronavirus cures online. And so, yeah, Gates gets celebrated and Jones gets a punch in the nose. And like him or not, Icke also gets a punch in the nose, right? So these people who have a varying concept, who are giving you a different narrative, who are telling you something else is going on here, they're the ones getting attacked. But Gates wanting to grab your kids and separate them into different places with his electronic vaccine tattoo. He's celebrated as a great guy. He's a superpower. He has superpowers. This is an interesting article. It is from the BBC, and I was shocked that they were paying attention to Icke. Look, if everything that they say is that Icke is a marginal conspiracy theorist, fine. Then I guess you guys don't pay attention to him, so let the people who listen to him listen to him. That's the way it goes. YouTube tightens rules after David Icke 5G interview. Now, YouTube, which is the platform we're on right now, used this as an excuse to tighten their rules about what they would accept in terms of constructive dialogue. He didn't say anything racist. He didn't say anything violent or criminal. What he said was he thought that the coronavirus had been blown up beyond all proportion to facilitate the oncoming fascist state. And he also rolled it into this 5G narrative. That's what he did. And like it or not, and agree with it or not, or think that he's a space cadet, it doesn't matter. He could be the smartest guy in the world or not. It's important for people to have options to look at, to decide for themselves. So instead,
because we are adults.
Yes. Well, no, you're all children of Bill Gates, and Bill Gates will bring you. Captain Gates will bring us home. That is kind of the sick reality that they're trying to promote out there. Because remember, he has the money, and the media are his puppets because they're just interested in his money and influence in that system. So the media's gone to an all-time low. I was thinking about this, thinking about even the 70s and 80s, and what the media had some pushback in the 70s and 80s, and they would research things. They did go into the CIA running drugs and all the rest of it. The media is just gone. It's just gone. And what's left is the independent media, which the mainstream media has tried to infiltrate with a lot of silly things. Remember, what I say the rules of dark journalism are, you have the official story on top, that's number one. Number two is the secondary story, which is often called the conspiracy theory. It's brought forward by a lot of professors, a lot of writers, a lot of researchers, and the media tries to call it conspiracy theory because it pokes hole in the official story, i.e. the JFK assassination, their official story. One guy did it alone, even though there was seven wounds and all these other ridiculous things. The real story being that the CIA had a major role because they couldn't get Kennedy off their back because he didn't want them running the world. He said it's the job of the president to do the will of the people. So that's something that's the secondary layer. Then under that, junk conspiracy. Junk conspiracy is very important for us to eschew when we're looking at different things involved with the media, because junk conspiracy is all over the place in the independent media. And the mainstream media is junky enough. When it gets into this space, when you hear people saying, don't worry, in 3 days, the white hats will have taken care of everything, that's junk. That's a pretty easy way for you to look at it. I have a really easy solution for you. If somebody comes up to you and says, I just saw this great thing about how everything's all set and these white hats are coming in, tell them, have you read or listened to the work of former Secretary of HUD, Catherine Austin Fitts, or have you read Joseph Farrell's work? Use it as an excuse to educate them. If somebody comes up to you and says, well, this guy says that he talks to blue space aliens, just turn around and say, and they told him all about these great white hats that are coming to rescue the economy. Just sit down and say to them, have you ever heard of the work of Professor Peter Dale Scott, who created the deep state? Create the culture in your conversation. Give them options, because those people have been riding around on these themes that are absurd, and we've seen it over and over again. And Catherine Austin Fitts rightly termed it hope porn, and it is the curse of the independent world, of this kind of stuff that gets out there. But it's very well promoted because it creates a kind of a docile atmosphere where you just think, hey, all these white hats are doing this stuff, I can sit back with popcorn and do it, and I don't have to do anything. That is the essence of failure, and it's the essence of irresponsibility, because you're telling people that, they basically are being taken care of by like Big Daddy Trump or something. And it just doesn't equate with reality. If anything, Trump needs, if you felt that Trump was going in the right direction, then he would need his people very mobilized and aware and not waiting around for some, I don't know, white hat operation. You have to prove things. And this is what I think is just essential. If somebody says to you, hey, I heard this story, they're rescuing all of these slaves that were held in tunnels, say, give me evidence, give me one story, anything that's real, not just some weird post by somebody on a board in like 8chan, or they don't even have 8chan anymore. So, give us something real, or let the alternative independent media be evidence-based. We can always talk about theories, but let's work with evidence. And let's go from there, if people want to wonder about what other things could be happening. You cannot operate on these kind of clickbait headlines of people saying, all these great things are happening. Trump is taking over the Federal Reserve. There's just no evidence for it, and you have to be able to say that and still think that you can get what you want out of the political process. You haven't given in because, Q or some other thing doesn't exist. It's okay, that stuff, and even that you got into that stuff. Now you're in a crisis. Now wake up. There's a real deep state. Now you can look at the work of Catherine Austin Fitts that's been sitting there waiting on a shelf for you to pick it up. The work of Joseph Farrell, the work of Peter Dale Scott, the work of Gigi Young. These are things that are there for you. You now can move in the right direction. And
the wild ramblings of Olivia Minx, girl.
Exactly. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I think it is important because the information that we sift through, there's so much where it's just coming on down, and we don't want to get saturated. We want to get rid of the junk conspiracy, the hopium, exactly. Good call, Victrola. You're watching episode X-85. This is about the deep state coup that is taking place. There is evidence for it, and that's what we're going over tonight. Okay, more evidence. Gavin Newsom, who last week declared that he could use martial law anytime he wanted to. This is, I went and checked this out. This is the first time that a governor has used the term martial law. I think the last governor who used the term, he actually, we have to go back to Alabama, and we're talking about in the 60s. So, and that was during the civil rights movement. This is a really far out thing to say in the modern era, that you're going to enact martial law, especially when you're supposed to be, ostensibly helping your population. But now he's come back with something new. Gavin Newsom now declares he's the leader of a nation state. That's right. He's got his own nation. The nation of Gavin's brain, Gavin's fascist brain. This is very interesting to me for a lot of reasons, because I think Gavin Newsom is kind of the poster child for this crazy corona response and what they had in mind with it. You remember when the election was over and Trump had won and Clinton's came down, and they had waited an unusually long time to come out and give their concession speech. And they came out in these weird outfits, or purple. And, Bill Clinton had a purple tie and she had like a purple weird suit on. And I was like, purple, isn't this weird? The whole thing was strange. It was as if whoever had funded them in this effort said, we might be able to get Trump out using this weird CIA system where, they have a phony dossier, and we could do that. And that if we can say that the Russians influenced the election, then we can invalidate the election of the American people and roll you guys in there. And somehow them wearing purple is like purple revolution. Now we know that Soros likes all these different types of colors for his revolutions, the Orange Revolution and so on. But this Gavin Newsom piece has that quality to it. And now he has gone for all these lockdowns, and he suggested all these hardcore things for his citizens. But California this week, this is from Bloomberg, okay? Bloomberg.com. California this week declared its independence from the federal government's feeble efforts to fight COVID-19. and perhaps from a bit more. The other weird thing about this is that the article itself was strange. It was like I was reading it and I was expecting, a responsible article, and this guy starts talking like he's on another planet. The consequences of the fight against the pandemic are almost certainly positive. The implications for the brewing civil war between Trumpism and America's budding 21st century majority, embodied by California's multiracial liberal electorate, are less clear. Speaking on MSNBC, the paragon of virtue, Governor Gavin Newsom said that he would use the bulk purchasing power as a nation state to acquire the hospital supplies the federal government has failed to provide. And what's interesting about this, too, is they're using this whole thing about supplies. And what we've been seeing is that all the states apparently are oversupplied at this point with different things. But they love the panic. They love the, we need this because it's an emergency measure. I have emergency powers. You're under martial law. I'm the commander of a nation state. So therefore, I'm not subject to the Constitution, and so on down the line we go. Newsom, I think, is a particularly fascist example. And he's one of the worst offenders because he literally has come out saying these things. He hasn't enacted them as, like the Michigan governor enacted these things where you can't garden. That's severely fascist and idiotic. If you want to expect people not to go out to buy food, then I guess, they could make their own garden, grow your own tomato. But no, you're going to stop them from doing that? Well, then what? So it's one of the most asinine things. And I think what the most perfect thing about the governor of Michigan is that Joe Biden said, yeah, she's a pretty good contender for my VP slot. Oh. Wow. So this goes down the line, and there's a line in here that I think we should all pay attention to, because this is something that was floating around before this corona part hit. And it says, at some point, this civil war by other means. It's a weird line in a Bloomberg article. With the goal of enshrining GOP minority role will provoke a Democratic counteroffensive. Newsom, leader of the nation's largest state, is perhaps accelerating that response, shaking Democrats out of denial and putting Republicans on notice. California, an economic giant whose taxpayers account for 15% of individual contributions to the U.S. Treasury, is now toning up at Muscle Beach. What? I don't know. Is there a strike at Bloomberg? They just pull on these idiots to write over there? What that means, of course, is left to the imagination, but not much is required to envision what might evolve. Ha ha ha. A fascist state under Gavin Newsom. So this nation state stuff is something to watch out for. What's interesting is these are the same people who ridiculed the people who were like, I want to be a sovereign citizen, or I want a sovereign state. Or when Texas had a movement and said, well, we want to break away from the United States if you're going to enact X law and X law. Well, now all of a sudden we have this nation state, right? So it's like, hey, we can do anything. We can be our own fascist nation state. Okay, speaking of fascist, WHO doctor, I told you this week the hits were nonstop. WHO doctor suggests door-to-door searches to find the sick and then remove them and isolate them. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Frankenstein. World Health Organization Health Emergencies Program Director Michael Ryan speaks via video link about the COVID-19 pandemic. There's our friend right there. Is there a doctor in the house? This guy is out to lunch. Let me tell you. Here's his quote. Let's get ready for this. The most likely person to become a case is someone who's been a significant contact of another case, he said. And at the moment, in most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening at the household family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units while you locked everybody down. So if it's exchanging between family members, that's because you said, hey, everybody go in your house. Now we need to go and look in families and find those people who may be sick and remove them. Who gave you the power to remove anybody? Thank you, Adolf Ryan. Isolate them in a safe and dignified manner. Oh, thank you. As you put me into the oven, it's a safe and dignified entrance into the oven. This is the level these people are thinking on. It is absolutely sick stuff. And what's amazing to me is how fast their rhetoric is turning to this kind of like drooling at the mouth at the thought of enacting these fascist reforms. Yes.
The question they seem to be asking themselves is, what else can we get away with? How far, I mean, even on a subconscious level, I'm sure consciously they're talking about this, but individually, it's like they're just driven, compelled to keep pressing the limit.
Yes.
You know, how far can they
pushing
go?
the envelope to its outer limits. And this is what we're seeing. And they're doing this incredible job of instituting this idea that they can get away with this, just like the certificate. So if I want to, go for my daily haircut, I have to show my Corona certificate. Or if I want to go, and buy groceries, here's my card, sir. This is the kind of world that they want to create. But that's one aspect of it. What they really want is that ability to surveil the individual and to use the individual as a harvesting point and to basically use them as a commodity. This is the nature and the fundamental idea behind this push. This is why we need to resist it. Just while we're working with the crisis stuff and the middle managers and, the governors saying things like, try to shelter in place. Fine. We have New Day 2020 as the hashtag for May 1st, which is when Trump is talking about reopening the country. We need to push that out there and get Trump to stick to his guns this time and not collapse like he did with the Easter promise. In the meantime, in those 3 some odd weeks, we need to push hard on this entire kind of vaccine fascism framework that's coming down and demand that these companies that are throwing people off for creating petitions against Bill Gates or throwing people off YouTube or whatever, to make a really big noise against those companies doing that so that they know they're going to pay a price and that the price that they pay is going to be politically at the ballot box. And in terms of the public, there are other channels. There are other ways and means to do the things that we do. These guys don't have all the marbles. They have monopolized things, but there are ways to get around it. And if there are enough people pushing back against that, it sends off waves. It's interesting because someone emailed me and she said, well, why should I waste the time emailing Governor Newsom? I'm sure he doesn't care what I have to say anyway. The effort, when you move on this level energetically, it's like everything moves with you, all the magnetism of those people doing it. And it's not just hitting like on Twitter or whatever, that's fine. But it goes deeper. It goes a lot deeper. And Olivia, I think you have to check that to make sure it's still coming through because it doesn't appear to be. No, on the other side. Sorry, a little technical arrangement here. But I think that this is the crucial aspect. Yes, you're back. You're back. Better than ever. Oh, no, you're gone again.
Okay.
Gone. There's a little bit of a switcher going on here. Yes, you're back.
Okay.
You're back. Okay. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're bringing it to you live. And so far, so good. Had some interesting issues earlier, but I never talk about that stuff. Okay, we are getting some great questions.
I want to bring something up right now, just for a minute.
Yes.
Shamanist Anamkara says, so what should the resistance look like? What actions do we all take? I just wanted to say, although we're not going to be addressing that specifically tonight, I am deeply concerned and I am working on some stuff. I've had some inspiration and I am up to something.
Yes.
So that I will present as quickly as possible when I get it together.
Yes, yeah, like a focal point.
Something we can rally around.
Excellent. That's fantastic. I think that there's a number of things that are going to be coming forward as a result of this. Remember that turning the op is a crucial thing that we can do. And we've been so sort of in the belly of the op in the past month or two with the way that they've rolled it out and increasingly hem people in. And now you have these schizophrenic people at the supermarket, running around afraid because they've been completely programmed with this idea of fear and just acting like complete idiots. And, if you want to do well and take the advice of the middle managers and whatever it is that you think makes you safe, that's fine. But calm down. Get a hold of yourself. And remember this, too, that they've been giving you really lame health advice for a long time, and that they've been holding down holistic cures for things like acupuncture, like massage, like chiropractic, all kinds of different types of therapies. There are all kinds of great immunity boosters for keeping your system alkaline, staying away from GMOs. Look, if they were concerned about your health, they never would have allowed the Frankenfish, GMOs, Roundup, and all the rest of it. They are not concerned with your health. This is a power grab. And certainly governors and mayors and county managers and all that kind of stuff, they were worried about getting overwhelmed because that was the word that they were hearing. But I don't think even they, the governor here in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, he announced something. He's like, it's the first tracking system, and this is their next move after the panic from the virus slows down, is they'll be like, we'll be able to track everybody and anybody you've been in contact with, and we'll do it all through this app. And Google and Apple have announced working together on an app where you can sit down in a restaurant and it'll bleep off if there's a coronavirus patient in the place. I mean, this is the sick things to make them necessary, to make them controllers. We don't need any of that. You go through fundamental health channels for these things. You work with good medical authorities who are applying a range of activities. Remember, just mainstream Western health doesn't help so much. There's all kinds of modalities in the healing arena. And
the last thing we need to do is give these people more power.
Exactly. That's a great point. Fantastic point. I couldn't have said it better myself. So we're going to go deep on this. Let's go a little bit further now. We've done the WHO quote. I do want to highlight this clash between Kennedy and Gates. And I think this is really the mentality that we're looking at here. There's two different mentalities that are going on here. One is interested in the public welfare. The other is trying to harvest humanity. It's two very different goals for humanity. And there's a lot of deep state control in the Gates side of it. There's a lot of money involved with this. Professor Scott recently mentioned that he felt, as this was rolling out, that it was a deep event. Remember, he doesn't use that for just anything. And one of the major things that he cited as a deep event was 9/11. So he feels that there are very deep players going on in relation to this. But a quick note here, Robert Francis Kennedy Jr., an American environmental attorney, author, and opponent of vaccination. Kennedy is the son of Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of former John F. Kennedy. He's the president of the board of Waterkeeper Alliance, a nonprofit environmental group that he helped to found in 1999. You see, RFK Jr. has those credentials. And when we're looking at the situation, we need people from every walk of life. And those that are bringing this forward on his level, we need to give as much support to as possible and try to see what they're doing, try to see the message that they're trying to put out and amplify it as best we can through social media and everything else. The importance of what that woman pointed out, and the woman who emailed me and said, what does it matter if I write an email? It is the power of you putting it forward. And there's that fantastic quote from Goethe, who said that when a person makes a decision, that providence moves with them. And I think this is essential to understand, which is you focus and amplify your intention when you bring it into the world. So in the case of if I were a California resident or a Massachusetts resident and I didn't like these things that were going on, if you write the governor about it, it is a worthwhile exercise. And even if you think that they don't care about it, one, I do think that they care about it, and two, I think the force of it comes together, and you now are more on board with it because you've manifested it. Absolutely crucial. I want to, before I get into this, I have I have some really strange information about these tracking systems. And I have to say it came up on the Trump side, but it was the Kushner-Trump side, which is always debatable as to what angle they're coming in on. And I think that Jared Kushner is a strange presence in this way with his connections, because he's connected through family, obviously, being married to Ivanka, but he is a White House advisor. And this is a guy who's in the private sector, and so Trump wants that liaison into the private sector, fine. But we also have to be careful if those people overstep their bounds. And so in this case, this story came out widely, which was that Jared Kushner's team was working on a surveillance systems to track the coronavirus in the U.S. This is the thing that we're seeing with both Newsom and some of these forces around the president also, Fauci mentioning this kind of thing. This tracking thing literally means a total violation of normal constitutional procedure. There's no way to track an American citizen. They are, who hasn't committed a crime. And if you want to create a kind of medical tyranny, exaggerating, for coronavirus, although incredibly catchy, has not shown itself to be particularly lethal. As a matter of fact, as those projections come in, it's going further and further down towards the flu. That's just a fact. Now, it is dangerous, and it's dangerous enough to have a reaction to it, but they have overreacted to such a degree. Now, a couple of quick things from this article, which came out of Politico, which was well sourced. White House senior advisor Jared Kushner's task force has reached out to a range of health technology companies about creating a national coronavirus surveillance system to give the government a near real-time view of where patients are seeking treatment and for what, and whether hospitals can accommodate them. So on one hand, you might say, well, I just want to be able to provide those resources for these people. But you can see how a person's privacy is instantly compromised in a situation like that. And also now they're tracked all of a sudden. So it introduces government tracking. The problem is that, we can't trust the leadership not to abuse these things. And that's why in the Constitution, it's absolutely crucial that you are protected from illegal search and seizure. And that's exactly what this constitutes. It's just electronically, it's upgraded for a new generation. The founders of America, they said, what we need to do is we need to introduce this, and every 20 years, we need to go back and update it and apply the principles to the new situation. That's the scenario that we're in now. So the proposed national network could help determine which areas of the country can safely relax social distancing rules and which should remain vigilant, but would also represent a significant expansion of government use of individual patient data, forcing a new reckoning over privacy limits amid a national crisis. This is where the battle is moving to that we've been tracking. Now, remember, Trump's part of this battle is that he wants the May 1st opening. On our side, with the independent media, the thing that I push forward today, we are saying hashtag New Day 2020. That's May 1st. Reopen America. That's what we need. We have to reopen the country because the economy is going to completely blow out. If we don't, there'll be a lot more suffering than just, the kind of deaths that we've seen from the coronavirus. And we needed the time. These people have given us the excuse that they needed the time to ramp up, to flatten the curve, to ramp up the healthcare system. Fine. You've given the time. You've even got 3 weeks till May 1st to do this. But on May 1st, the country's going to reopen. That's what New Day 2020 is all about. That's the hashtag that we should use there. That's the Trump direction. That's where he's going. This other thing that's trying to come in, like I said with the New York Times article today, using an unnamed Homeland Security source, Adolf Anonymous, saying that, oh, no, there's going to be 250,000 deaths if you put people back to work. It's just not true. And, there's no precedent for it. And we've seen all the numbers already collapsing. So in any case, there's also...
And we didn't have a treatment yet.
Exactly.
Which now we do.
Yes. Yes. There's a series of treatments.
Yeah.
And the one treatment that's been doing really well is this incredible chloroquine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hydroxychloroquine. Mm-hmm.
And that's very interesting because
it has no patent, right?
Yeah. The media hates this one. Mm-hmm. And they spread this phony story about Trump owning, the Huffington Post did this. They said Trump owns shares in this. No, he doesn't. And that was proven to be a false story literally within 24 hours. They don't want the end of the crisis because they have to surrender. Gavin Newsom can't walk around like a dictator anymore saying, I've got martial law and I'm a nation state emperor. This is the illness at the level that these people are on. And remember, over and over again, they're stuck because they lost to President Trump in 2016 because they had a terrible candidate. But their vision for America that they were offering didn't inspire people. People were sick of it. And now they're coming back and they're saying, well, we couldn't get the Trump administration out. We couldn't use the Russian collusion phony nonsense. That was all BS. We couldn't use impeachment, which was also BS. We couldn't use the CIA, throw them out with the Steele dossier. That was BS. And they're worried as they're going into this election, they'll lose again. So they're thinking of something which is so outside the box on the COG side, on the destruction of the economy side. They are the ones who are thinking up scenarios where they can get back in power because the way that they're moving it on the Trump side isn't the way, it's not the full-on direction that they want to go. The Trump administration may have its issues. Primarily the issue I have with the Trump administration are figures like Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who in the background is trying to drive us into a war with Iran and Venezuela, which is absolutely absurd. But I think that the problem with the Trump side is that they're not bowing to this kind of telecoms and China aspect. And so they're not in there with the social media giants. So that social media credit system and the whole thing that they can roll out, that system of control, Trump represents too much of that faction, which is all about America first, the manufacturers thing. Now, the Kushner aspect of this is also tricky in the Trump administration because he's kind of moving out with this idea of surveillance and using this national network. Those things are unconstitutional. That's just all there is to it. And we've had situations where people have medical conditions before. There's all sorts of solutions that can be applied. The Marshall system of tracking people, we saw those horrible things today where they were throwing people off of buses in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. This is what it inspires. It gives people a reason to be a fascist. That's not good for democracy and for a democratic republic like America. It's the worst. It encourages the worst. And so I think when we look at those factions, we have to be clear about what they are. The Trump faction is moving to reopen the country now. That's the, New Day 2020 that we're pushing. And put that hashtag up, Olivia. Hashtag New Day 2020. Get that on people's radar. May 1st, America will reopen again. Open up America. And we've dealt with the danger. We'll continue to support the middle managers and ever. But we need to be able to go back and not be on our knees to a government so they can seize all our power. It's inevitable. And the new day is May 1st. That's when we're coming back. So we're back. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X Series 85. We're going deep on this constitutional crisis. Now, we're going to be taking your questions here in a couple minutes. Before we go there, Miss Olivia, how are we doing?
Good. I did want to ask you, what do you think we should be doing now in preparation for New Day 2020?
Everything that we're doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Pushing it out, getting into gear, spreading the word, spreading the message, getting the information out that many of the numbers have been falsified, and while supporting those people in the middle, and also getting the word out about how the country needs to reopen and that America is not set up for this kind of fascist takeover, and there will be tremendous pushback from the citizenry on this. As long as they get to hear it, we'll push back on the censorship also. So that's how we should spend those 3 weeks. Yes, what else did you say?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about the famous quote from JFK.
Yes.
And about asking not what our country can do for us, but what we can do for our country. And that really comes alive right now.
Yeah.
I think everybody is at home and they're reflecting on their lives and what led them to this moment. You know, all of us. We're off the hamster wheel.
Yes.
And we can reflect and we can make instead of jumping right back on that hamster wheel and trying to make up for lost time economically, what could we be doing differently? At least I don't know if I have all those answers yet, but I know that I'm asking myself those questions.
Yeah, they're excellent questions to ask. The thing is that David Lynch, the director, made some interesting comments about how the world was going in the wrong direction and there was this kind of correction that happened. It's fascinating too, in the Gurdjieff work, there's something called an octave, which you hit a point and things sort of resonate for a while and then go back to normal. And it's very interesting. You can always use any crisis and situation to get things to a higher level, just like they're trying to use it to generate things. And I think that the Gurdjieff type philosophy and the things that we've talked about here in the X series many times, like Rudolf Steiner, like the Casey work, which is all about holistic health when you think about it, those things really come into play. I wanted to give us a little perspective again, like we did when we started with the Kennedy quotes. And this is actually from P.D. Suspensky's book. He was a student of Gurdjieff in the Fourth Way, and he was a Russian philosopher who did some very, very fascinating work. And we've brought him up many times in the X series. This book is very interesting because it's his letters that he's sending during this real crisis of the Russian Revolution and how things are just falling apart as he's walking around, and he can't believe how people are just thinking, well, everything will go back to normal, everything will be fine, and before they know it, they're being thrown out of their home by the Bolsheviks. Let's take just a quick look at one of these letters. Quote, I spent the winter in a small town of the Terek district. There, the teachers of public schools did not receive their salaries. They got neither the full amount, nor did they get it when it was due. For some sort of reason, however, this is considered to be quite natural, and nobody takes any notice of it. The government does something for the military and its own immediate workers, but people not engaged in either the military or other government work are left to themselves. We're into the Russian Revolution period here. Deprived of all assistance and of their elementary rights. It sounds like a joke, but it is a reality. If you are not on military service, you cannot get a railway ticket unless you are prepared to pay an enormous bribe. Many towns are closed to you, nor are you allowed to rent a room or a flat. Quote, the right to live, i.e. a written certificate authorizing you to reside in any particular place, a measure applied to Jews, is now a rule for everybody. This is interesting how he's describing the kind of techniques that they use. I do not know whom we have to thank for such a brilliant solution to the problem of personal rights, but facts remain facts. And that was a right to live written certificate. Thank you. Broadly speaking, the Russia that existed before is gone, and gone long ago. There's a bewildered and a hungry country where people are thrown out of railway carriages, where every conception of cultural value is gone, where any intellectual life ceased long ago, where at the same time the number of people under the command of somebody or other is continually increasing. And the sole aim of these persons who command is to improve their own position at the expense of those who are deprived of all rights. Sound familiar yet? And then he goes off about Bolshevism. Bolshevism begins with loud and fierce declamations. To pave its way, it chooses the whole arsenal of extreme socialistic and political doctrines. It promises the people all they ever dreamt of, all they could dream of. Never for a moment does it think of what it can or cannot be fulfilled. These boundless promises form the outstanding feature of what I call the first phase of Bolshevism. Hungry, weary, injured, scarcely rational people begin to believe. They always believe when something is promised to them. The Russian Bolsheviks promised peace. It was their trump card. Their struggle against the tragic comic government of Kerensky in 1917. The personal staff of the advocates of Bolshevism is also a peculiar thing. It consists, in its greater part, of neurasthenics. A little note I read in one of the English newspapers told me a lot. The Bolshevik literature was brought over to England. There are names there that always mean a lot. The first phase of Bolshevism is composed of words, first of all promises, then calls to vengeance, lies, defamation, and again, promises, promises. It's very interesting as I think about this, because I think about all these internet sharing groups where we hear about, Gitmo trials and all that stuff. It's a promise that there's going to be justice. It's a promise that you're going to get everything you ever wanted. They have to feed you into this fantasy before you're plunged into the Russian Revolution and Stalin rule and all the rest of it. And it seems to me that we're facing something very similar. And the echo from 1917, just like back from 1776, is that if we just walk into these situations, when we wake up, we're going to wake up under a tyranny instead of in liberty in America and around the world. So we need to safeguard these things through our awareness, through what we're doing right now, through sharing these ideas. I have more of this to share with you, but right now, because of the time, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Olivia.
Yikes, I'm not ready. Okay, actually, I'll start with this one. So Shamanist Anam Kara wants to know, are Zionists in cahoots with U.S. Nazi scientists? And I would add, where do the Chinese fit in? Because it does seem that there's kind of a new Axis powers happening here.
I think, yeah, here's what I can say about the Chinese part, which is Google and Facebook and American business formed this alliance with the communist/capitalist Chinese. That is, they can still use communism, totalitarian tactics when they want, but they're able to use the capitalist financial system. And people call that progress in China. I'm not so sure. China's had a terrible history, an absolutely terrible history in relation to human rights. And it was, in fact, what attracted so many businesses to bring their factories over there, because they didn't have to do anything to protect the labor rights of the workers. So we have that weird, strange situation there. And then the Zionist part is very tricky, and it becomes very hard to understand. But I think the main push around Zionism right now is coming directly to try to put pressure on the American government to bomb Iran, which would be the greatest foreign policy blunder in history. First of all, Iran has close to 100 million people, and we're not in a situation, we're not at war with Iran. And the idea of bombing them, or as we did, assassinate their number 2 leader, is bad advice from neocons inside the Trump administration. And that, I do feel there's a Zionist influence in that, which has a lot to do with that aspect of the Middle East. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of players on that political board. Yes.
It does seem that what we're dealing with is a government.
An invisible government.
An invisible government for of and by the elites. And that really our country,
yes,
for of and by the people, is long gone. And I think people are waking up to that. And we're trying to figure out now, after the game's been afoot for a while, too long, what the hell we can do about it.
Well, what's interesting about that is the Constitution is the thing that they keep running into, because that's the thing that they'll need to get rid of. That's why emergency powers. If I have emergency powers, I don't have to deal with the Constitution. They were talking even that they didn't need to deal with habeas corpus, right? So I don't need to deal with reading you your rights, and I don't need for you to have representation of a lawyer, and I can hold you without trial and all that kind of stuff. Look, we had been through, as a civilization, many kings who had exploited the situation and enslaved their people. generations. We have it in our blood. And the thing is, when this is going on, what they've done is they've got us into this kind of docile state where, isn't that the interesting history when there was like a Hitler and a Mussolini and those things that would happen in the past? And aren't we so great now? We allow everybody to be who they want to be and all the rest of it. But hiding under that is the same fascist thing, because you've dropped your guard thinking everything's under control. The only thing between us and that abyss is the Constitution, literally. And that's why the Constitution is so important. Now, the Constitution is binding. You have to understand that it's a legal document. In other words, if they violate the Constitution, in fact, you have the ability to sue them in a court of law for grievance, because the Constitution is the law of the land. That's the way it is. That's why the president, when he's sworn in, Supreme Court justices, when they're sworn in, congressional people, when they're sworn in, they swear an oath to the Constitution. That's the way it goes. It is the only thing that is between us and the abyss. What they want to do is create an emergency power setup where they can go around the Constitution. Constitution was worked out through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And although we've had it in place for over 200 years now, we are in a situation, basically, where they want to take that out. And remember, the thing that they were working on was turning America into part of the North American economic zone. That's what these corporations wanted to do with the technocratic rule, and that's where the Davos crowd came in. They've become too big, and we've given them too much power. And one of the great things that Secretary Fitz said recently was that we have allowed ourselves to live under psychos for too long. And so I think that what we need is a change in the policy, in the mentality of the people on the ground, and the policy of the leadership. That's what we're moving toward. Yes.
I just recommended everybody in the Ideas Room to watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yes.
Which is, it took me a long time to see that movie, and the performance, Jimmy Stewart's performance is incredible in it. And you will feel so patriotic.
Well, what's amazing is how relevant it is.
It is.
It's from 1939, just as we were going into World War II.
And it was not well received then.
I don't think it was well understood.
No, the press hated it. The politicians hated it. It
exposed the machine even back then, and James Stewart is particularly good in that. I have a couple of quotes here from Thomas Jefferson. I'm big on letters tonight. This is Thomas Jefferson writing to James Madison, and I think it highlights our theme a little bit, and then we're going to go right into the rest of your questions. I set out yesterday morning to take a view of the place. As soon as I had got a clear view of the town, I fell in with a poor woman walking at the same rate as myself and going the same course. Wishing to know the condition of the laboring poor, I entered into conversation with her. She told me that she was a day laborer at 4 sterling per day, and she had 2 children to maintain, to pay a rent of 30 livres for her house without bread. As we had walked together near a mile, she had so far served me as a guide. I gave her on parting 24 sous. I don't know how much that is. She burst into tears of gratitude, which I could perceive was unfeigned, because she was unable to utter a word. She probably never before received so great an aid. This little gesture, with the solitude of my walk, which led me into a train of recollections on that unequal division of property, which occasions the numberless instances of wretchedness which I have observed in this country and is to be observed in all of Europe. The property of this country is absolutely concentrated into a very few hands, having revenues of from 500,000 guineas a year downwards. Those employ the flower of the country as servants, some as many having as 200 domestic servants. Not laboring, they employ also a great number of manufacturers and tradesmen, and lastly the class of laboring husbandmen. But after these comes the most numerous of all the classes, that is, the poor who cannot find work. I asked myself, what could be the reason that so many should be permitted to beg who are willing to work in a country where there is very considerable proportion of uncultivated lands? These lands are kept idle mostly for the sake of game. It should be seen, then, that it must be because of the enormous wealth of the proprietors, which places them above attention to the increase of their revenues by permitting these lands to be labored. I'm conscious that an equal division of property is impractical. But the consequences of this enormous inequality producing so much misery to the bulk of mankind, legislators cannot invent too many devices for subdividing property, only taking care to let their subdivisions go hand in hand with the natural affections of the human mind. The descent of property of every kind, therefore, to all the children, all the brothers and sisters, or other relations, in equal degree, is a political measure and a practical one. Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt all from taxation below a certain point, and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise. Whenever there is in any country uncultivated lands and unemployed poor, it is clear that the laws of property have been so far extended as to violate natural right. The earth is given as a common stock for man to labor and live on. If, for the encouragement of industry, we allow it to be appropriated, we must take care that other employment be furnished to those excluded from the appropriation. If we do not, the fundamental right to labor to earth returns to the unemployed. It is too soon yet in our country to say that every man who cannot find employment, but who can find uncultivated land, shall be at liberty to cultivate it, paying a moderate rent. But it is not too soon to provide by every possible means that as few possible shall be without a little portion of land. The small landholders are the most precious part of a state. Think about that. This is the fundamental rule that he's giving us, which is as long as these working poor are in a balance of having just a certain amount of land, they'll always be somewhat equal, regardless of how unequal the wealth develops on one side. That is what Jefferson brought forward. That's where we get the Declaration of Independence, which he wrote, and that's where we get his tremendous push for the Constitution. These are things which we can't forget in the haze of the insanity that they've been trying to push on us, that these people came forward at a certain point in time and bucked the odds, and certainly the larger army, to push back the king in England. And we are facing a situation, again, where we may have to do that. Now, it would be better if we press the situation and the powers that be come to their senses, or if they see that we're so awake that they won't be able to do these things. But this is the type of scenario I think that we're facing as well. They saw it clearly back then, and they had the imbalance back then. We've been dealing with this for a long time. Their solutions that they brought forward with the Declaration of Independence and with the Constitution, that's what we need to bring forward for the country. That is the connection, not crazy Bill Gates or nutty Gavin Newsom with, I want to be an emperor of a nation state. Real, fundamental, constitutional rights. That's the thing that can't be violated. That's why we're in a constitutional crisis, because their emergency powers are neck and neck with our constitutional rights. Constitutional rights always supersede the emergency powers. They are the law of the land. That's the thing that we have on our side. Yes.
It's interesting. This is really backfiring, I think, at least
yes,
what I've seen so far.
On a certain level it is.
Because what they want is us to reprioritize our lives and they want those priorities to be about protection. The state will protect us.
Yes.
And instead, I think what's happening is people are connecting to something deeper. And they realize something we've known for a long time, we've lost something vital. And we're not quite living. We're certainly not thriving. And it's that give me liberty or give me death quality. And say, what is this country all about anyway? Who am I as a citizen? And we are supposed to have the power to recreate this country. every generation.
Absolutely.
And so I see that sort of flame of liberty.
It is.
You know, craving of
That's
freedom
exactly how
starting to get stoked through
Yeah.
all this because people have a chance to reflect on this.
Yes.
So all of us, we should be taking time, meditating on it, journaling about it. What is our citizenship all about? You know?
Well, they've been able to trick a lot of people into the idea that, you know, they've taken that quest for liberty and they've twisted it into having people fight with each other and call each other racist or whatever it happens to be. It's very easy to do that, to set people off against each other. We've seen it over and over again. Even with this, you're setting people off against each other because people who question the narrative, it's like they're not being patriotic or something, when in fact just the opposite is true. Because if you're getting soaked and if you're being given phony numbers, as we've seen fraudulent numbers that they've been giving out saying, we're not doing the actual count. We're saying anything that's a death that just might be related to this, we're going to count it as a COVID death. That's how they inflated the scenario. Just like the Imperial College gave us the wonderful gift of the phony 500,000 deaths and then revised it down to 20,000 before they looked like idiots. It has to be taken in mind, just as we take the health crisis seriously enough. But it's not worth surrendering all the rights that we've developed over it. That's what they want to do with it, and we can't allow them to do it. It becomes more clear by the day. Those two things that we have going on, the very clear, the real litmus test for the whole thing is this new day 2020, because May 1st is when the Trump administration is looking to open the country. That much they're on board with. We, on our side, need to push that through and also show them that we support that action. Those who don't support that action are in league with this other thing. And they want the control. They want to keep the emergency powers. That's the thing that needs to be pushed back. And that's what I think we can do. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here on X Series 85, going deep now on this constitutional crisis and the deep state coup. We're taking your questions. You can ask them all in caps. And we're going to be taking some more. So go for it.
I wanted to bring up Gerald Salente's famous quote.
What is it?
It is, when people have lost everything and they have nothing left to lose, they lose it.
They lose it.
And I think, you know, this is the temptation here to descend into chaos. And
Yes.
But instead, actually, there's that other line from Janis Joplin about freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, is that this actually, if we're not going to have the American dream the way it was presented to us, because they have really taken the carrot away, then that gives us freedom to do anything, to get out there and protest, go to Washington. I mean, like, let's have the 60s all over again.
Well, this is an interesting thing because protests are, look, the 60s are very important. There's that great line in My Dinner with Andre, which is that the 60s were the last gasp of humanity. Look, it caused into the public imagination, again, that they needed to address the government with their grievances. It's guaranteed in the Constitution. You know, there's no rule that they can create that says, hey, you can't gather because you can't protest. That would leave them free forever to do whatever they wanted. People will eventually bust out of that anyway. It's a stupid idea. The idea of following normal health routines while this thing is going on and all the things that we've been doing, once you run it up to May 1st, people have already been quarantined for, as a country. That's an impossible thing to do. The fact that, if they can get their act together in that period, great. If they can't, then, we move into a totally different scenario. It doesn't matter the scenarios that they've been laying out because, again, the numbers have been so manipulated. What we do know is the country needs to go back to work. And the medical community coming forward needs to offer us the differing opinions, and the media needs to sit down and shut up and give us the real facts, not keep us going on this thing of like, oh, you might get, 500,000 dead because we like to excite ourselves with the idea of how many of you are going to die. They've been terrible. And what we need is perspectives. The thing is, look, it doesn't matter what you believe. If you believe the worst case scenario or the best case scenario, all the scenarios should be out there in public. When you start throwing people out the window, when you start throwing them off YouTube, when you start throwing them out of Reddit because they're questioning the official narrative or they question Bill Gates, there's something wrong fundamentally with your democracy, with your democratic republic, with your nation. There's no rationale for that. That's just corporate rule dictating a particular narrative. That's not how to get you to think. That doesn't get us anywhere in America. Since when does a one-note thinking get any country anywhere? We're all about diverse thinking and coming up with the best solutions, not what does Jack Dorsey at Twitter think? Is he going to remove my tweet because I insulted Oprah? Yeah, they're going to keep you in the naughty corner because you brought up that 5G might be related to the coronavirus. Hey, listen, even if Icke was wrong about that, he can say it. He has the ability to question it and get people to think about it. It's important for us to think about it. While everyone's running around scared to death in a mask, 9/10 of them are so healthy that this thing would never touch them. As we know, it's actually over 99% that it'll never touch. So, it gets to be a theater of the absurd. Now, along with that, it's always good to take health precautions under any circumstances. And like I said, we have that whole middle manager thing that everyone's going along with anyway. So what we're talking about is a different level here, which is the country needs to open back up. Let me tell you, when you get into some of those inner city situations and you look at the kind of effect that losing all that small business and all those jobs and all those bartenders and people who are working at gas stations, driving cabs, driving Uber, anything, you lose that and you really lose the fabric of a society, much more so than this medical crisis, far beyond it. And that's why people like Ron Paul are calling it out and saying that people like Fauci need to be fired because they've created a situation where they've let us try to lead us over a cliff. And that's where we're pulling back here. Yes.
Robert Ayala says, who or what could really be behind all of this tug of war and infighting of factions? Could you explain the different factions behind and how they see the world?
Yeah, well, the thing is, that's the groups and the factions that we explore on this program. The best way I could say it is look at all of our deep state programs and get an idea. But the idea of the deep state is crucial because this is what we're up against. And the deep state, it is a deep state coup after all. The deep state in Professor Scott's analysis comes out on these 4 levels, which is there's a level of the intelligence community, there's a level of organized crime, there's a level of extreme wealth and those who manage that wealth, and then there's a level of the intelligence agencies and their contractors. So the contractors can do things that the intelligence agencies haven't, the green light to do. So, for example, Booz Allen Hamilton is a part of that deep state that is outsourced by the CIA, because if they're doing it, even as super secret as they are, they may get thrown out. They may get found out. So Booz Allen Hamilton has the ability to skirt the Constitution and surveil people and do all these other things. And then they have the ability to go back to the CIA and say, we did all these hours of observation on this guy and, pay us off. These are the same people who, through the NSA, developed the Bluffdale Center, where they recorded every digital phone call and every email message. And they say, don't worry, we'll never look at that stuff. We're just keeping it in case of emergency. And they're compiling every thought and every detail on every person. That's completely unconstitutional. It should never have been allowed in the first place. So we've been asleep at the switch and asleep at the wheel. These forces, remember, when I say intelligence agencies, they are connected with Wall Street. They are connected with the oil companies. They're connected with this level of wealth. And FDR in the 30s said to his close confidant, there's a financial element that's been controlling this country since the turn of the century. That's what he felt. And they seek to move. And remember that FDR was almost removed himself by a coup of these businessmen and generals. And one of the generals they went to was Smedley Butler, who wrote about it. So thank God we have it on the record, because they didn't at the time bring it public and prosecute. But those people were looking for a fascist overthrow of America in the 30s. Don't tell me that they gave up all of a sudden. Certainly the Bushes and their fascist connections, they have the coup aspect embedded in them. Are you going to tell me that the JFK assassination wasn't a coup? I mean, it's a straight up a coup. That's why, 57 years later, they won't release the records on it, because the CIA was involved in a coup of an American president. Why? There's so many reasons why. But with Kennedy, he was going towards freedom. He was opening things up. It was going to be an open society. The CIA weird control grid stuff that they were moving into position, which became the transhumanist movement and all the things that we're looking at today, it could not have grown. You couldn't have had the Vietnam War with Kennedy in there. You couldn't have had the secret space program. I mean, Kennedy is on the record putting us on the record saying that we won't develop nukes in space. That's huge. And that's something that's a failure on the side of the Trump administration. So I think I got away from your question, but that's pretty much the explanation of who those factions are. I think it's really like we just have to get past this. I figured it out, and I finally embraced the truth. Okay, is that really what we are dealing with is a bunch of control freak psychopaths. That's a fact. 1 in 5 CEOs is psychopathic. Yes. Okay, so yeah, that's a great point. There are many psychopaths and sociopaths and people who are Machiavellian, like Kissinger. We are dealing with them. They are the one. Their whole agenda is to play games. They want not just to control things because of survival, but they like the game of it. This is the CIA. That famous line in JFK. Fun and games, fun and games. Yeah. That's what it's all a game to them. It's all a chess game. Yeah. We are pawns. I think it's a really great point, actually, the game part, because the other aspect that we address on this show and that people like Gigi address and others is there's an occult aspect rolling in the middle of it. And that's where knowledge of mystery schools, things that we study on this program like X-steganography, those things help us to get closer and closer to the identities. And what's interesting is Jim Mars said to me that the people who are doing these things have names and addresses, and that he didn't want to think of it as a monolith. He wanted to think of it as individual groups. Peter Dale Scott, Professor Scott, his idea of the deep state is not of a structure, but of a system. And that helps us, I think, to get a handle on it, because if we think of it as a monolithic structure that just, we have this simplification going on. People use this term of the cabal, which is associated mostly with like Ben Fulford and the whole galactic ambassador type stuff. But the cabal is a really wrong way to look at it. It's actually stupid kind of video game way to look at it. The deep state shows the layers of what that is and how those layers fight. Remember, there's a deep state that's supporting Trump. It's just that the ordinary deep state that we're familiar with that ousted Kennedy is also against Trump. But there is an aspect of that deep state that's pro-Trump. So, when we look at the deep state, again, it's not monolithic. It's a system. It is an apparatus. And there are people in that system who try to accomplish different public goals, and they want policy changes so that covert government sneaks into the overt government, creates something like a 9/11, creates something like an Iran-Contra affair, and then goes back. What I want to point out, since Professor Scott has said that this is a deep event, is that all of the deep events that Professor Scott has tracked, Kennedy assassination, Watergate, Iran-Contra, the October surprise, 9/11, they all involved continuity of government players. So continuity of government people are always involved. The question becomes, why? Because it's that system, it's the emergency system that if they can turn it on, they can develop enormous powers over the public that they can't get while we're under the Constitution. That's kind of the best way to look at it. Okay, everyone, we're dealing with Dark Journalist episode X Series 85, and I want to remind everyone to go to the Dark Journalist website and sign up for our newsletter. We've seen incredible censorship online. It has been over the top and sensational in its arrogance. But we're on that chopping block at all times when we deal with these mediums. The best way to ensure that we can stay in touch with you is to go and sign up for the newsletter. While you're there, support the show. We've made it very affordable, and get behind the work that we do. Of course, we appreciate all the help that our supporters give us to keep our work going forward. And it makes a big difference. So we really appreciate that. Now, we're going to take a couple more questions, and then I guess we're out, Miss Olivia.
Okay. So Sylvia M. says, what can we do to change the current platforms? And I think she was the one who was saying that maybe what we should do on May 1st is take a break from social media, sort of boycott Facebook for a week.
Isn't that interesting? Well, it is New Day. Okay. So hashtag, get that one on.
Yeah.
New Day 2020. That is May 1st. And I think the thing that we lead up to is that on May 1st, it's going to be a new start where the country's going to reopen. So I would think that would be a big day to use social media, actually. Although I do feel like taking a break from social media is always smart. New Day 2020 is important, I think, because they've put us through this situation. We need a clean break from it. The president has indicated that he's moving to restart the country, and I think that that's important. That's our opportunity. Let's show that support online through social media. It is something crucial that I think we can get started, because it's a new day. We're putting this COG push, deep state coup, in perspective, and we're moving back to work, and we're going to tell them the types of powers that they can and cannot have. And we're going to rely on the Constitution, and it's not always going to be pretty necessarily, but we're going to keep it about changing policy, and we're going to keep it about respecting the Constitution. And I think as long as we do those things, we'll have a better outcome. But I think we do need to signal to those forces and to the Trump administration that May 1st is the date. Because if that's what they're pushing for, then we want to give them that support, because it's the first good decision that they've made on this. And we want to throw out the bozos who are talking about 12 months, right? Can you imagine? You wouldn't recognize this place in 12 months if you keep this up. So just throwing out that system, I think, is absolutely crucial. Okay, Miss Olivia.
David Tormina, DJ, could the citizens of America be able to sue the WHO and CDC for creating a health scare with fraudulent mortality models?
Yeah, well, I think that that's interesting. I think that you'd have better luck suing the states that take draconian measures and push it. Now, we've seen, this is interesting, and I don't like things to be political, but the Democratic, there's something about going on with the Democratic Party where they just want to dive into this communist fascism, the social credit fascism. And so we see the governor of Michigan, we see the governor Gavin Newsom, even the governor here in Massachusetts talking about tracking everybody. These are not constitutional observations. They are completely trying to use these emergency powers to push something else. They're trying to become the poster child for that something else. So my feeling is that those measures where they're forcing small businesses to close, it is those businesses that are going to have the ability, if they don't turn this around, because it's reasonable to say, oh, we were caught by surprise, the numbers, we were lied to, and we responded the best way they could. Fine. You know what? That's fine. Now we have numbers, a more realistic picture. Your hospitals are set up. Things have been put in place. They've had a stimulus. Okay, go back to work May 1st. That way everyone doesn't lose all their wealth and it doesn't go like a magnet to the top. This is how I think we could do it, but it's going to be a legal question, and it's all going to focus around the Constitution, which is the great gift of our forefathers here. Yes, Ms. Olivia.
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions. I'm just going to link them together.
Okay.
One, has President Trump been removed from power?
Well, that's what they're trying to do. And I don't think what they've been able to do is create an atmosphere where he can't maneuver. But he's getting ready to maneuver, which is why I think the New Day 2020 is important. And I want us to get our heads wrapped around the idea of May 1st. America needs to reopen May 1st, regardless of what else happens. I mean, Austria has just announced that they're reopening. Sweden never closed in the first place. But Austria reopening is actually very important because they are showing that they have the guts and they're not using the fascist tactic. They are realizing the incredible, heinous economic impact that this is going to have. America needs to do the same thing while keeping the health standards and safety standards as the best that they can. But there is a way to do that. The idea of shutting down on this level was always a bad idea. We can say that they overreacted because they were lied to by the Imperial College. I think the Imperial College should be totally taken to task, and that the dirty players should be rinsed out. And I think also that Dr. Fauci and what he got wrong, that should be very clear in the public's mind, and he should come forward and apologize also for those bad numbers. His connection to Gates makes him incredibly suspect in any case. But that's the team that Trump put together. And I think the danger, remember this, as much as this situation has been dangerous, okay, the nuclear situation is so much more dangerous than something that is, basically a limited health crisis. Nuclear material can stay in the atmosphere forever. So unleashing the nuclear arms race all over again. Recently Mikhail Gorbachev came out and said, Reagan and I, even though he was a right winger and I was coming in with this, we negotiated 85% reduction in the nuclear arsenal. Think about that incredible accomplishment. Trump recently got us out of the INF intermediate range treaty with the Russians, which means you can now start developing those weapons again. It's a terrible thing. It's very important. As much as the situation we've been in is serious, a nuclear situation would be so much more serious. So we need to make sure, as we communicate with the powers that be, that the nuclear part is on the table, and we do not want nukes in space. We don't want the war in space. We don't want a war with Iran. We don't want nuclear anything. Go back into a treaty that reduces those weapons. We don't want new shiny nukes. None of that BS. So, because if you think this is bad, that's the absolute worst. Okay, keep rolling.
Okay, so David Tormin again. DJ, there seems to be a connection with Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. Did I ask this already? And O'Shaughnessy? Is COG leadership pulling Trump's strings? Can he resist their pull?
That's pretty interesting. O'Shaughnessy, I think, becomes more and more someone, and by the way, David Termina does great open source research on Twitter, which is out there and always has very fascinating links and ways and means of looking at these things. So I always enjoy looking at his stuff. It's very important for us to understand that, COG, for example, this came up yesterday. It says NORAD intercepts Russian aircraft, and that's O'Shaughnessy here talking to this guy. Now, O'Shaughnessy is out over and over again in the middle of this. Why? Why is Newsweek touting him as the COG president who would take over if Trump got sick? It is a trial balloon. That's the way the media works. It's an intermediate trial balloon for putting someone like this in power who has zero constitutional authority. I'm sure he's a fine general. I'm sure he's great with NORAD, probably does a great job there with Northcom. That's where he belongs. He does not belong in charge of the United States of America. So I think it's interesting that we have to be careful, just like with the intelligence situation, running away with the game, that the COG powers are so entrenched in this plan that they come forward and, they could tell somebody like O'Shaughnessy, hey, look, your country needs you. And he's such a hawk that he's, it's very much like the 7 Days in May scenario. And I've said a lot about that movie because it was JFK who financed it. And, again, that's a situation that's over 50 years ago, but it's the same problem, which is fundamentally, the deal is in America, it's civilian control over the military. That's the way it goes. And so whenever they suggest another scenario, then something's wrong. And whenever you start to see people from that other scenario being touted all of a sudden, COG has been largely secret, and rightly so, because one, I think people would object to it. And two, just fundamentally with the idea, other countries knowing who those people are could target them and learn all kinds of things. I wanted to point this out, actually. It was absurd. It was, this is actually the new coronavirus spy drone will make sure you stay home. Yeah, how cute. But it was that the Israel doomsday bunker for top officials had been activated for COVID-19. Now, we know that O'Shaughnessy activated Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. Okay, what kind of optics are those to open up these emergency bunkers during this and to actually go out and proclaim that? It's very, very dicey. And so I think that we are looking at a situation where COG is sneaking in to have this presence there, so that we're getting used to it, and this idea that, hey, they might have to take over, and that's okay. I remember the Newsweek article and how it was trying to use this kind of maybe millennial language and it's saying it would usher in, I don't know, some kind of martial law, I guess, martial rule, hey, that's cool, I'll watch Netflix during martial rule while the tanks are rolling. It's trying to get you disconnected from what's actually happening on the ground and the threats to your democracy. So it is very interesting, I think. Yes.
Sacred Forest. Do we think this is an American deep state biotech used to subvert China, or the other way around? I've seen good arguments for both. I have too.
It's fascinating to think about. We've covered it from both angles. In my conversation with Dr. Farrell, we talked about this too. What's important is that there's a case of this Harvard professor, which he was doing his work only a few minutes from here, and he was giving the Chinese the research that he was working on nanotechnology and other technologies of this sort. Now, there's a fundamental thing, and here's the nutshell of it. Somewhere along the line, a series of professors were doing this, and not just at Harvard, but in other places. And they were working under the table for China. And there's a scientist out there named Francis Boyle who put forward the notion that they actually didn't steal the virus patent or anything like that, that they actually bought it outright from America and developed. There's all kinds of unusual things about Fort Detrick and Maryland's, and they had such a sketchy situation going on that they shut it down. That's the same base that was associated with the development of anthrax and this Operation Dark Winter from June of 2001, before 9/11 and all this came about. It represents unchecked power. And if you think about it, if something like the coronavirus escaped from one of these labs, what does it mean about what we need to do for oversight for those types of labs anywhere in the world? Because if it came out of China and can sweep around the world and it's a good excuse to make everyone like Gavin Newsom into Hitler, then I guess we better get a huge handle on who's doing that stuff. By the way, while we're at it, why don't we get into what those countries are doing with cloning and the types of ethical standards that need to be put in place so that we're not seeing the kind of Frankenstein monsters built. I mean, it is a great opportunity for us to wake up, because right now we still have a microphone. I'm not guaranteeing that for the future, but this is, while we have the microphone, we ought to be using it. That's the name of the game. Yes.
Nicholas Karupis, please ask DJ his thoughts on a tax holiday. Starve the beast.
Well, look, I'll tell you who puts forward the tax aspects. Is Catherine Austin Fitts. And she says, with so many of these things going on, with Gates being able to roll in here and propose that he can just tattoo everybody and all the rest of it, what is to stop Americans from completely ceasing to pay their taxes as a result of these things. I think it represents, again, another lever of power that we have as on the citizenry side. And it's important to rebalance the situation between the citizens and the leadership. There's a cycle of disrespect from the leadership to the citizens, and there's a lack of trust of the citizens to the leadership. So we're in a weird situation there, and we need to demand a totally transparent government. What we were just talking about with the development of this virus and the biological weapons at Fort Detrick, I mean, what laws are being violated, and if that is getting into the hands of our potential enemies, how dangerous is that? So certainly we're in a situation where we need to make the government more transparent. And make the corporations less all powerful. This is a huge shakeout. It's a change in our mentality. That Gigi Young would call it a shift in that consciousness. We can't go with the old consciousness. You heard Ouspensky talking about, going back to the old way. Everyone was walking around during that Russian Revolution being like, well, hopefully this will end and we'll go back to the old way. It does not work that way. Yes.
Did you bring up the snitch comment?
Oh, that's true. The mayor of Los Angeles. I had a lot of fun on Twitter with this one. The thing is, he was saying snitches will be rewarded in this situation.
There's that famous saying, which is snitches get stitches.
Yes.
Right? And he said, in this case, they will get rewards.
And then he said, he literally said, for turning in these people who are violating my standards or whatever. He's also the guy who threatened to cut off the water and power. You don't have the ability. You're a mayor, mayor of Los Angeles,
But it's divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. This is it. I want to link this to this question Marco Zerpa was asking.
Yes.
Are we in danger of a social revolution like in the Soviet Union? I'll say yes, 100%. They've been very effective at dividing us, and they have been fomenting this kind of millennial uprising, especially with Extinction Rebellion, and Antifa. This needs just a little bit of heat, and we have to be really careful. This is not about left versus right or boomers versus millennials or any of that. This really is about oligarchs against the rest of us. We have to frame this properly to see it.
Yeah, that is exactly at the heart of the divisions. I mean, think about Soros, for example, Antifa and all that. Those are all Soros groups. So he knows how to foment revolution. He just seems like a guy who likes it, and he's part of that scene, that scenario. Again, these people, like when we see Bill Clinton hanging out with Gates, with Soros, they're all hanging out at Davos with Jeff Bezos and all that. I'm sure that there's a plan somewhere with Bezos. He just was going to open up his first Whole Foods with all robots. And this is part of it too. And so they're moving towards, look, those elites, one thing we know about them is that they were always about shrinking the population. And they're always about eugenics. Now, look, you can agree or disagree with that. The point is that they should be transparent and say, we want depopulation. Here's how we think we can get it. Not sneak around behind your back and give you something in a vaccine that will make you sterile. Mm-hmm. Because that makes you an idiot chimp and makes them all powerful. That's the cycle of disrespect. Instead, somebody like, and not Crazy Gates either, because he's got nothing. He literally has no authority. He hasn't run for office. He's not a medical doctor. He didn't even finish college. You're out of there. You have no reason to be saying anything except that you have a lot of money and a lot of influence. And that, that doesn't really mean you have any quality as a human being. And so I think what we're looking at is those people from that end of the fence need to come forward and sit down and say, we think the earth is overpopulated, and here's what we think we can do to accomplish it. Instead of, don't worry, we'll take your child because you have coronavirus and we'll give them 78 vaccines by the time they're 5 years old. And that will, for sure, as we've seen, it creates all kinds of numbers in autism. It creates all kinds of developmental disabilities. It creates all kinds of physical difficulties and
autoimmune disorders.
Yes, all the rest. So fundamentally, look, there's too many people on the ground who are aware of this, and at least we have some powerful advocates with people like RFK Jr. You're not going to be able to pull it off. It's going to have to come down to debate, and then these forces that have protected you, even the people like Oprah who've come out, who so many people trusted, come out in favor of Bill Gates and all of these ridiculous celebrities like Madonna with Bill Gates. They're just part of this thing. And but the awareness is coming through. We're seeing through what's going on there. And there are many people, even RFK Jr., it's not like he believes that no vaccines work. He's just saying, look, they want you to take 78, and you used to take 6. What's changed? The pharmaceutical profit model, and maybe worse. Maybe they're going for depopulation through that. And with 5G, terrible impact on the environment. All the people who are for 5G supposedly are people who are against greenhouse. They're against this whole thing about climate change, right? They don't want climate change to happen, and they want to tax you for that, but they want to roll out 5G on you. It makes no sense. Just like the people who are in favor of the idea of illegal aliens coming into the country, well, they can't be vaccinated. They just roll in, so none of these things make sense anymore. The reason that they used to keep the borders loose and open is because there used to be so much drug activity, and somebody is benefiting from that on the government side. So these are the things, or on the banking side at least. So these are the things. We're going to have to go deep on the questions, and that's what we're doing. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is episode X Series 85, and it is about the deep state coup in this constitutional aspect. We're going to take 2 more questions, and then we're going to wind it down. But wow, incredible questions from everyone tonight. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter, because that keeps us in touch with each other. Look, they're throwing everyone off social media. They're throwing the videos they don't want off. They're demonetizing everybody, because they're trying to control this narrative. We can keep the narrative going, but let's have that direct pipeline with each other. Yes.
7 Synesthesia, DJ.
Yes.
Why do you think Bob Dylan released a song about JFK now?
I'm very glad that you brought that up. I'll tell you what's interesting about that song. It is a 17-minute song, and it has gone to number 1. I don't know if any 17-minute song has ever gone to number 1. I know American Pie was about 10 minutes long, but I don't think anything 17 minutes has ever gone to number 1. This is a very unusual move, and I think that Dylan, who really understood a lot in the 60s and 70s about the political process and had followed Woody Guthrie and had really created this kind of cult of Dylan, he really went off into nowhere's land, and this is a strange and very interesting comeback for him. And I think the timing on it is very, very interesting, considering everything that's going on. And I would say that Dylan is someone who understands to a great deal the destruction of the country that came about as a result of these powers getting away with the assassinations of John and Bobby Kennedy. And for him to come out with it in a song was very fascinating. And I've been trying to figure out his motivation just beside getting older and reflecting. But I think it is good to bring that into the public's consciousness to kind of reawaken that gene inside of everyone understanding that this great future was taken from us then, and they're trying to do the same thing again. But we might have the ability, if we remember, and if a number of people do remember these deep events. And I think that the idea of saying that we were robbed of one kind of a future, and now we've gone back and acknowledged that, what we need to do is acknowledge publicly that President Kennedy was assassinated, and that the CIA was involved, and that the government covered it up, and that this whole story about Oswald was just a CIA concoction. We need to get that on the record to sort of cleanse the record and move forward. Robert Kennedy was assassinated by a Lockheed Martin employee, not by Sirhan Sirhan. And those things need to come forward now. These 60s assassinations, there was a war going on. Our side lost, unfortunately. And we got the power mongers, the LBJs, and the Bushes instead. So if we can cleanse the record, we can get a better picture of what happened and not move into those scenarios for the future. Yes.
Trump still hasn't released those JFK files.
No, he still has the ability to do that. And he released some, but he was mandated by Congress to release them all October 26, 2017. And we're still waiting. We're still waiting. Congress made that rule in 1992 in response to Oliver Stone's movie. Everyone knows. I mean, we all know it. This is the thing. Anyone who's ever paid any attention or cares, when they look at the Kennedy assassination, unless you're just wearing blinders, he was assassinated. The CIA was the lead role, and the government covered it up.
It seems somebody wrote Occupy USA. And I've been talking a lot about this behind the scenes about.
Well, you remember the Occupy movement,
exactly,
2011.
and Occupy should have been effective. It should have worked, but everybody always said they didn't have a platform. They couldn't agree on a platform, and they looked like a bunch of, ragtag, hacky sack playing, pot smoking, ne'er do wells. So they didn't get any respect, and they didn't get enough support. And I think it's time for that to come back around. I like this idea of Occupy USA. And the one thing, this is it's a bigger idea that I've been thinking about, is what would that platform, I'm going to throw it out there. We're going to crowdsource it. What would that platform look like? Certainly releasing all the JFK documents would be part of that.
Yeah.
Because this is about truth and reconciliation. This is about healing. It isn't about anger. It isn't about bringing out the guillotine. Although we want justice, but it has to be about healing. And in order to have healing, we cannot have any more lies, no more deception.
Well, this is an interesting thing because the media that controls everything participated so heavily in the JFK cover-up that that media just needs to collapse in order for the right story to come out. And this is inevitable because that's the JFK assassination is what they have not been able to put back in the bottle, for one. But the idea of what you're talking about a kind of an Occupy type situation, look at the Berlin Wall. How did the Berlin Wall come down? People on both sides came together. The government said, don't go near that wall, don't go near the wall. Everyone went near the wall and they tore down the wall. That's the way it works. Imagine if those people, if they said social distancing, you can't go near the Berlin Wall, we'd probably still have it. So there's a point of civil disobedience, and Malden and Civil Disobedience is a great manual for these times. And what you hope is that these forces don't create this situation. But if they do, you have to be ready. And you must be able to be ready to protect the Constitution, because it's not just about our lives. It's all the people who would live under weird transhumanist tyranny after we're gone. And so it is a very pivotal moment, as JFK's quote gave us that insight that this is the time. And, I welcome the time to kind of protect these liberties for humanity. But it is crucial to point out it's always accomplished by people getting together and overthrowing that system. And there's tons of people, just like in France, the way that they threw out this ridiculous CO2 tax that they were going to lay on them after they're already in, kind of semi-depression, and then you're going to squeeze what's left of them. That's the way that those governments think. It took all those people rioting, protesting, whatever it is that they had to do to bring attention to that. That's what it takes. So, the thing about social distancing and all that is very convenient, isn't it? If you're a government that plans to do draconian measures, if you can get into people's heads that they can't gather, it's kind of the ultimate trick. But I do feel like there's a certain point at which that facade falls. And I like the Berlin Wall as the the kind of image there. Okay, Miss Olivia, the last question tonight.
The last question. Okay. So Grandma Tippy Toes, what does DJ
Yes.
think is going on in Cheyenne Mountain? What's really happening?
I'll tell you what's weird about our friend Terrence O'Shaughnessy hanging out and mentioning that mountain is he goes out of his way to talk about how he has some very special visitors there and he's trying to make room for them and hope that there'll be enough room for them. Okay, they've had these facilities for years. They are gigantic underground military bases to run the United States in the event of a nuclear attack. The idea that you don't have enough room for your special visitors, and even the idea of bringing it up, I think is extraordinary. I do think that there is a trial balloon for a COG government to come into play this year. And I think that's why we're hearing about all these things. And I think that they, in their crazed, mentality, thinking that this is their moment to fascist shine, they actually think that this is possible. And that's why we're seeing so much of O'Shaughnessy. The thing is, they're underestimating a lot, but the situation is very dangerous, as we see every day with the types of lockdowns that they've put out there. And if I were the head of this government, if I were the President Donald Trump, I would, one, make all of these leaders like O'Shaughnessy take a public oath now in public again for Northcom and all the rest of it to the Constitution, not to the homeland, not homeland this and homeland that, as O'Shaughnessy doesn't seem to like to say the United States. He likes to say the homeland. Well, the homeland, is whatever kind of fascist fixation you can make out of it. The United States of America has a constitution, identity as a nation. That's who we are. So I believe that President Trump, if he's listening tonight, bring them out in public and have them re-swear their allegiance to the United States Constitution in public. Make all the COG members that are making themselves public and all the Homeland Security people do that. Because it's not homeland in the United States, it's the United States, and the Constitution runs them. And Northcom, which was created in 2002 by the Bushes, after 9/11, which, there's a lot of unanswered questions about, shall we say, that's where that whole thing comes from. So that's their weird secret government. As a matter of fact, on the White House, they actually call it a shadow government on the White House website. So that's not even the Dark Journalist show. That's the White House website. So President Trump, do yourself a tremendous favor. Fire Secretary of State Pompeo. Fire Gina Haspel at the CIA. Both of them try to drag you into neocon wars. Both of them are CIA and Bush acolytes. Get rid of them, first of all. Then make all of your senior members of Northcom and all the COG people swear in public to the Constitution of the United States. That is going to be very hard for them to wriggle out of with emergency powers, saying, oh, you need to let the homeland take over. That's how I would handle them, for starters. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's been a fantastic night. What a great crowd that we've had tonight, going deep now on this, and we really appreciate you being with us. We'll be back with you next week. However, we may have a surprise for you before that, because we've been having so many interesting situations pop up as we've been going along. There are some great interviews also coming up for later in April, trying to keep on top of this. Yes.
I'm going to say one more thing. Is that there is a tendency to spend too much energy on people, their bloodline, just sort of focusing on the quote enemy. And that doesn't lead anywhere positive. That's not constructive, after a certain point. Once you figure out who these people are and what they're up to, what their agenda is, you don't need to keep digging down to the details, right? You've got the broad strokes. What we need to focus on is ourselves and our responsibility to ourselves and to each other. And what we have the power to recreate this country and this planet for the benefit of all of us. all the sentient beings, we can take this opportunity and we can make something beautiful out of it. And I don't mean that as a new agey, airy fairy. I mean, we need to get our hands dirty. We need to take risks and make sacrifices.
Absolutely.
But it is so worth it.
No, listen, you're absolutely right. And you have an incredible grasp yourself on the nature of that type of change, what it would look like. And you're right that we must be able to envision the world coming to a better place, being a constitution in charge, and us, and that kind of freedom and inspiration growing, and Americans being their best and growing our own food and getting our manufacturing base back. That's what we can envision. When I speak about things like O'Shaughnessy and Northcom and COG, it's not to create this image in our head that that's inevitably going to happen. It's the opposite. It's to warn us about its presence so that we can avoid it as a democratic republic. And that America has always had, just like in 1936 with the coup attempt against FDR, or with the coup against Kennedy that was successful, we've always had these forces that were trying to do this, and we've always had to appeal to kind of a higher power, as they did in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, saying we want to be free and we want to have the blessings of liberty upon us. We do not want this sick system that they want to create of certificates going state to state and filling us with their magic mercury vaccines and depopulating humanity while they live some weird transhumanist fantasy. They've degraded themselves. That's what a lot of these people in our society that are celebrated have done. And they become delusional at a certain point. They start believing their own insanity. It's like they live so much in a weird bubble that's the loop that comes back to them. Because they're paying everybody off, nobody has the guts to tell them what the truth is. So we have to be very careful when we're dealing with these people, because we assume that they're coming from a rational point of view. But, Hitler was not rational. And you can become just, living in this kind of fantasy of yourself, as people like Gates obviously are. And so I think when we look at it, we have the ability to envision a world where these greater things come to pass because we've awakened to what was happening in time, and we've used our intuition, and a lot of people have become awake as a result of it as well. Wow, incredible, Miss Olivia. Fantastic questions.
That's what happens when you spend a week watching shows about the 60s on Amazon Prime. That's what happened to me.
There you go.
Okay.
There's a lot with the 60s. You have super chatters.
I have so many. All right. Eurythmia's Fun, Medley Childress, Spirit Sense, Chris Beatty, Tricky Vicky, Josh Randall, Brian Bradley, Mixed Latino American, Matute 11, Erie A, Joseph Fabry, Carol Crumlish, Rostrom and the Seer, C. Ray, Duke Halley, and Gummy Bears, PJD, What World D, Vinnie Barbarino 29, Bill Clayman, Trioxin, Gary Cates, 23 Skidoo, GDNPB, Wayne Peak, and Flood. If I missed anybody, I'm sorry. It was a fast chat tonight. Thank you so much.
Incredible. Wow. We really appreciate your support, and we're going to be bringing you many shows here as we get into the spring, dealing with this and with all the subjects around the X series. And we really appreciate your support. We will see you next week. And you might see us even before that. As I said, go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter, become a subscriber if you're not already. And we will see you all next week. Thank you, everybody. Dream the big dream. Dare to dream. Nicely done, Miss Olivia. Thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks so much for being with us. And it says end broadcast, but it never really ends. 5 to 1. Not around here. Good night.